Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 2005 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Reese Witherspoon won for her performance in Walk the Line. But why did she beat fellow nominees Judi Dench, Felicity Huffman, Keira Knightley, and Charlize Theron? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 78th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 2005. We'll be discussing how Reese Witherspoon won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is actually appearing on the show for the very first time. She is a freelance film critic and member of the Online Film Critics Society, Gallica, North Carolina Film Critics Association, and the Southeastern Film Critics Association. Welcome to the show, Mattie Lucas.
Hi, thank you. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Excited to be here.
Very excited to have you on. But before we talk about this very interesting year in Best Actress, let's talk Best Actress overall as a category. So first question for you is, what would you say is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
It's obviously Norma Shearer in The Divorcee. No, not really.
Wow. Hot take coming in hot. I love it.
I thought a lot about this question, actually. And the one I kept coming back to is Maggie Smith in The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. She is my all-time favorite actress. And that's an iconic performance. I feel like you can't go wrong with that one.
A great pick, and it's one of those picks where the ones who know.
Yes.
Because I feel like it is one of those that is just like, whenever you see it, it kind of just like skyrockets to like your top 10 or 15 in this category.
Oh, my girls are the creme de la creme.
Exactly. Well, my other question for you, we all know about heartbreaking loss in this category.
Mhm.
So what for you is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
So for this one, I was focusing on the races that I was actually following at the time. It's really hard for me to look back at older races that are already so established and see them as heartbreaking just because they're kind of facts of life to me at this point. But I think the one for me that hurt the most, that I was the most excited about, was Emmanuel Riva losing for Amour to I can't even remember her name now.
Jennifer Lawrence.
Jennifer Lawrence in Silver Linings
Jeez.
Playbook. See, that's how mad I am about it.
It's a mental block. Yeah, I get it.
It was one of those. It was one of those that Jennifer Lawrence was favored the entire year. So it was not unexpected, but as the race wore on and it got closer, there were these signs that maybe Emmanuel Riva is going to pull it out. And it was her birthday, and it was just so perfect. And then, it did not happen in the end. But I think her performance in Amour is just breathtaking.
Yeah, and stands the test of time. Yes, I remember that race very well, and seeing her win the BAFTA, I think, was just like, oh boy, like this could maybe shake things up. Plus, Amour did so well; it got in the director and screenplay and all this stuff, and yet I bet she was close. I think, with another few weeks, who knows what might have happened. I don't know. Well, looking forward to definitely breaking down that performance in that very hotly contested year. I'll say that, because there's also the Jessica Chastain of it all, so that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this year at the Oscars, the 78th Academy Awards. The nominees were Judi Dench in Mrs. Henderson Presents, Felicity Huffman in Transamerica, Keira Knightley in Pride and Prejudice, Charlize Theron in North Country, and Reese Witherspoon in Walk the Line, with the winner being Reese Witherspoon. So before we break down these performances individually, overall thoughts for you on this lineup?
This is just such a strange year. I feel like it's probably one of the weakest lineups overall, at least in the 2000s. As I've been preparing for this, I've been thinking back to what the race looked like at that time, and I really started Oscar watching around 2000, I believe, and really started seriously in 2001. So it was still fairly early on in my Oscar watching days, but I remember so little about this year. I feel like I've maybe put it out of my head. I think uh 2001 is very special to me. I think 2002 is iconic. 2005, when you first approached me about this, I was like, wait, who was even nominated that year? I went straight to Wikipedia and I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, this is such a strange year with there are no best
Mm-hmm.
picture nominees in this lineup. I feel like if the field had been expanded to 10, we might see one or two
Yeah.
in there. But otherwise, yeah, I think this is a weak year, and I think it's a fairly weak year overall. I mean, there are not a lot of other people in the hunt for the Oscar that year that could have really replaced them believably. So yeah, I don't know what was going on. I don't know what was in the water. And then, Crash wins Best Picture, and the whole thing is just it's one of those years. It's like it's fun to talk about, but man,
Yeah.
it's not it's a bit of a blight on Oscars history.
Yeah, I think you're right. Something was in the water. We had just reelected Bush. I don't know. Something. I don't know what exactly it was, but yeah, very lukewarm lineup, to put it diplomatically.
Mhm.
I think all of the performances here have good qualities to them, but most of them are either in films that are kind of weak, or the actresses themselves have been better in other things, or it just feels like, these would be like the performances that just miss out on nominations because like they're not quite strong enough or they don't have enough passion, and yet here they are. I think there was probably just a slight lack of options overall heading into the nominations, kind
Mhm.
of to your point, at least for like traditional Academy fare, because as well as I do that, there are always options outside of those more traditional kinds of performances we get every year, but they're not considered like realistic choices for a nomination. So we get kind of what we get here. But yeah, otherwise, I do generally like all the actresses here. I'm glad to see Reese Witherspoon and Keira Knightley kind of breaking through here. Felicity Huffman is coming off a really incredible year on TV. And, with this performance kind of like crossing over, Charlize getting her afterglow nomination, I suppose you could say, after her win, and Judi Dench doing her Judi Dench thing and, doing it well. So, yeah, it's a weak lineup, but I think there is still a lot to talk about.
Sure, it's not even that they're bad performances. It's just when you look at it, you're like,
Yeah.
these are the five best. They're
Best of the year.
they're
Right.
fine. This is one of those weird years when I think that Best Actor is actually stronger than Best Actress, and that almost never happens. But you've got
Yeah.
iconic
It shouldn't
performances.
happen,
No,
I would argue.
no, it should not. But you've got the winner. You've got Philip Seymour Hoffman in Capote. You've got Heath Ledger in Brokeback Mountain. And I mean, even if those are the only
Yeah.
two in there, I mean, those are just towering performances, and there's really nothing to
Right.
equal that in the Best Actress category this year.
Not so much. But I think, again, we'll have fun breaking down perhaps why this happened the way it did. Anyway, shall we get right into it?
Let's do it.
All right, well, we're starting off with the dame here, Dame Judi Dench in Mrs. Henderson Presents. So here's Dame Judi Dench getting her fifth Oscar nomination in 9 years. Just a really remarkable run during this period, and it's going to continue into 2006 as well. So Mrs. Henderson Presents is produced by Bob Hoskins, who brought in Judi to star in with him, and they brought on Stephen Frears as the director. Stephen Frears, who, by the way, I don't know if you were aware of this, but he's actually directed like a lot of Best Actors nominees,
He
including
has.
Judi again later in Philomena.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of like looked back and I'm like, wow, I've seen a lot of Stephen Frears movie lately. And like, it's because of all the Best Actors nominees. But anyway, Mrs. Henderson Presents is about Mrs. Laura Henderson, played by Judi Dench, a wealthy widow who buys a theater with her fortune and it turns it into a live review. So it's 1930s England, and her big gamble is to have female nudity on the stage, and it becomes pretty popular until London is bombed during World War II and things take a very dramatic turn. And a lot of the film is about her kind of complex relationship with Vivian Van Dam, played by Bob Hoskins, the man she hires on to manage the theater. And also, this is all based on a true story. So let's talk about Judi Dench here, Mattie. Thoughts on the dame herself and her performance in Mrs. Henderson Presents?
First off, love Judi Dench, and I mean no offense by anything that I'm going to say on this podcast because I think she's fabulous. But
what a great disclaimer.
yes,
Yeah.
I apologize in advance, Dame Judy, but this is just such an early 2000s nominee. I mean, I feel like there were
derogatory.
Yes. Yeah, but
Okay.
there's a part of me that's kind of nostalgic for these these blue hair British films that were showing up in art houses, and I would go see these and be the youngest person in the theater. I had just graduated from high school. I was like a freshman in college, and was the youngest person by probably 40 or 50 years in these theaters seeing these movies.
Love that kind of crowd.
Yes, and it's Dench being Dench at her most Denchy. She's charming, she's imperious, she's got a lot of very cutting one-liners, but I feel like she could do this role in her sleep.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. I think this pretty much lived up to my expectations. This isn't one I had actually seen before this. I think she has a very fabulous energy that is just inherently fun to watch. It's not unlike what Annette Bening was kind of giving the previous year with being Julia, another entry into the Sunday matinee cinema for sure. But she knows exactly what the movie is, and she kind of plays it as broad as it needs to be when necessary. But I do think she modulates it enough that it still is a good performance. I do enjoy her kind of playful sparring with Bob Hoskins, saying all these things about like how she admires his gumption and like kind of enjoying that he gives her a bit of a challenge. I think overall what you see is what you get here. It is mostly like surface level entertainment for an older audience, but obviously with a slightly sharper edge to it because of the nudity. But even in that respect, like it's pretty tame, I would say, and not necessarily like as tawdry as it may have actually even been in real life, maybe. But I don't know. I think this is a character that is very much in her wheelhouse, where she's plucky, she's having fun, and there is also that layer of vulnerability too. You know, we've sort of seen a lot of this in her performance in like Mrs. Brown, for example, or Chocolat, or even Shakespeare in Love. So nothing too new, but I don't know. I think she makes it maybe look a little easier than it is.
It's one of those feisty old lady roles. I think as far as her other nominations go, this is one of the weaker ones. I think she's much better in Iris. I think she should have won for Iris personally. I think she's great in
Love that take.
Not to digress too much into that year, but watching that year, my grandmother at the time had Alzheimer's, and I remember seeing what Judi Dench did in that film and thinking how just spot on what she was doing was. And it's nothing like anything else she's really done, and I think she's so good in that. But Mrs. Henderson Presents it's I think she's better in Notes on a Scandal as well.
Well, sure. Yeah.
I would probably
Can't
rank this above Belfast. But
yeah.
otherwise, it's just there's nothing really about it that stands out. She's got that moment at the end where she kind of does that damn the torpedoes full speed ahead speech to rally everyone to reopen the theater in the face of the blitz. And I think maybe some moments like those may have been what put this over into a nomination for some of the Academy. But it's very light and fun, but there's really not a lot of gravity to it at all.
Yeah, I get that. It is very lighthearted, but I do I think I understand obviously what she's going for with the character, because she just loves being kind of the center of attention. And wielding her power, like at that one party where she's like very theatrically telling this crowd of people are all totally like enraptured by her about how she's like building a theater to honor her late husband who always cared for show business people, even though like that's not true at all. But she has like the gusto to it that like you're like, whatever, let her lie a little bit. Like she's having fun. This isn't hurting anybody. So I enjoy that.
Can I say something controversial?
Yeah.
um, I think she is actually outshone by Bob Hoskins in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that I would have loved to have seen a Best Supporting Actor nomination for him for this movie.
Yeah.
I think I mean, their kind of banter back and forth is a lot of fun to watch, but he's actually the one that I think kind of walks away with the movie a bit.
Yeah, I think that he's equally as good as her. I think they play off each other really beautifully, and they have a really charming sort of connection. I don't know if they had ever really worked together before, but you can feel just the energy between them. I like all the moments where she is getting very huffy with him. Like when she's kind of blindsided at this party by this revelation that he had a wife this whole time who he never mentioned, and seems to take it like very personally that he never brought that up. Always fun to get some great like bellowing Judi Dench theatrics as she's like yelling at him, and it's sort of unspoken, but she definitely has some kind of feeling
Right.
for him, even if she's maybe too proud to admit that. I don't know what your take is on like the nature of this relationship.
I mean, I think clearly that it's almost like an old married couple, but they're not. But I think there's a part of her that does have some sort of romantic feelings for him, despite all the acrimony going on between them. And there is kind of that tension, at least until she finds out that he has a wife. But there's almost something like Taming of the Shrew-esque in the way he treats her. The way there's that one scene where he actually like physically picks her up and sets her on top of the filing cabinet so she can't get off and come
Yeah.
interfere with the production. Um, Looking back on it's just it's one of those very fluffy movies that I feel like was very popular at the time, but I'm really not sure how it became to be so ubiquitous in this Oscar race. Looking at the precursors, she shows up in pretty much all of them,
Yeah.
which is interesting considering the shuffling of the other ones. She's one of the standards that follows it through. So clearly there was something that actors responded to, and I think this being a movie about the theater, um,
Mm.
probably also speaks to that a little bit as well. Actors love movies about actors, or
Yeah.
about the theater, and that's kind of been a through line that goes through the Academy for years.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's again the same reason why Being Julia kind of resonated, I
Mhm.
imagine, the year before. But I do think when it starts to transition into the World War II sort of portion, and Mr. Van Damme's identity as a Jewish man is kind of relevant, making it all the more real for her, I do think she brings a nice kind of vulnerability there as she's kind of like sitting with him and talking about how she always thinks that she can do something to fix a problem, but like in cases like this, she can't really do anything. I think she's very good at that kind of wistful sort of melancholy
Mhm.
as much as she is at that, the broad sort of naughty old lady type of broad humor, you know.
And I don't think their relationship always makes the most sense. Rewatching it for this
It
podcast,
is,
I
yeah,
was
up and
surprised at
down.
how, it seems like they're making friends again and they're kind of friendly, and then just suddenly out of the blue they hate each other, and it just goes like that up and
Yeah.
down for a good portion of the movie.
I guess it's just the line between love and hate is very thin, I suppose. I don't know. That's probably how they would justify it. And I think the subplot with, Kelly Riley as Maureen, one of the main women in the show, is interesting kind of from Mrs. Henderson's perspective, because she says to her kind of early on that she reminds her of her when she was younger,
Mhm.
and she eventually sets up this soldier with Maureen, and you really see like she's trying to kind of live vicariously through her in a way. I do enjoy the sort of cross-cutting between the whole couple situation there, and then we get these scenes of her looking at herself in the mirror, Mrs. Henderson,
Mhm.
and sort of like playing dress up, and like kind of admiring her beauty in this very elegant way. That's just an image that kind of stands out when I look back on the performance, is just her kind of just like admiring herself in the mirror and thinking back on her prime and things like that.
The Kelly Riley subplot is frustrating to me just because, I guess, spoiler alert, I think her death is kind of sudden, and I guess it's really more of a
Yeah,
plot device
it's a
to
plot device.
to
Yeah.
push
Right.
to push Mrs. Henderson where she needs to go. But Kelly Riley, also shows up in Pride and Prejudice with Dame
Yeah.
Judi. This was kind of Kelly
Mm-hmm.
Riley's year. um,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it is interesting, those kind of crossovers. As I was watching the nominees, I was like, hey, wait a minute, there's so many people kind of flitting in and out of them like that.
Yeah, that is always fun. But yeah, going back to what you said about the whole galvanizing moment at the end when she talks about how like her son died in the First World War, having probably never seen a naked woman like live in the flesh, and how tragic that is. I think just that whole speech could have been a little like, okay, but I do think she sells it in this great sort of Judi Dench way that
It is such a
I walk
funny
away. Yeah,
rally the troops sort of moment of just, yeah,
yes,
we're going to show all the young soldiers naked bodies for the first time, and that's how we're going to beat Hitler. And
yeah.
it's I mean, maybe there's something to that. I don't know, but it's just it is just
She's
such
doing
a
her part, you
she's
know?
doing her part. She's doing her bit there on the home front for the lads overseas. But
Yes,
um
a real Mrs. Miniver.
but it is a strange sort of perspective on the rousing kind of last minute hero's speech there.
Yes. So yeah, I think it's definitely not anywhere near one of the best performances in this category, but I think it is very just reliable work from an
Yes.
actress who was becoming a legend at this stage in her
Hmm.
career. Personally speaking, I can't wait for next week when we could talk about her career peak.
Yes.
um, so yeah, this is just a nice, easy little Sunday matinee pit stop to that.
A nice movie, a very nice little movie.
Yes, a nice 2.5 star little movie.
Yes.
And I don't have too much else to add to that, unfortunately. But anything else before we move on?
I think
I
we've
assume you're
about
tapped out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to a big one here, Felicity Huffman in Transamerica. Felicity Huffman, I believe, our only one and done nominee this year. Still time for her to come back, but she doesn't make a lot of movies, so seems a little unlikely. But Felicity Huffman was born in New York, and she attended multiple acting schools, including Circle in the Square Theater School and the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. She debuted on the stage, which she kind of did through the 80s theater work. And then in the 90s, she starts appearing in supporting roles in film and small scale stuff. She had a part in Reversal of Fortune. She's in Hackers, Magnolia, and she's also has her breakout with Sports Night, which she's on from 1998 to 2000, getting her first Golden Globe nomination. So she's kind of in that hardworking supporting actress mode through a lot of this. And then 2004 is a huge leveling up moment when she gets one of the lead roles on Desperate Housewives, where she plays Lynette Scavo. Very acclaimed performance, and she won an Emmy for the first season, beating her co-stars. So that happens in September of 2005, and also throughout the year, Transamerica is kind of touring the festivals. So 2005 is a huge kind of career peak for Felicity that ultimately culminates in this Oscar nomination. So Transamerica is an independent drama that Felicity got involved in actually before Desperate Housewives even aired. I just wanted to note that because sometimes the timeline can get confused there, but this whole part of her career sort of came together in a very serendipitous way, I suppose. And so she's taking a big swing here because Transamerica is about a transgender woman, Bree, and Felicity is playing her. So we do have a cisgender woman playing a trans character, much like Hilary Swank, but this is obviously a little different because she is playing a woman. She deepened her voice for the role. She did research on the trans experience, having admittedly not known much about the community before taking it on. So the film follows Bree as she prepares to get her gender confirmation surgery, only to get a call out of the blue from an 18-year-old named Toby, who turns out to be the son she never knew she had. And her therapist tells her that she needs to essentially resolve this and have some sort of relationship with him before she signs off on the surgery. So Bree goes to meet him in New York, finding out he's kind of like a hustler type. She's not really ready to tell him her true identity, either that she's trans or that she's his parent, and she pretends to be a Christian missionary. So she also finds out that his mother killed herself and his stepfather would sexually abuse him, and they go on a road trip driving across the country and gradually building a relationship, which is, of course, threatened when Bree eventually comes clean about everything. So let's get into it here, Mattie. Felicity Huffman. First of all, thoughts on Felicity as an actress, and I'm curious about your relationship with Transamerica and her performance.
Oh, I have thoughts about this one. Okay.
Okay.
Um, I don't have a lot of opinions about Felicity Huffman as an actress. I haven't really seen
Fair enough.
her in a lot. I never watched Desperate Housewives, so I'm not familiar with probably what she's most known for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think now she's most remembered for the college admissions scandal that happened a few years
Yes.
ago.
And going to jail.
Yes,
Yes.
so there's that. Um, but when the race was actually going on, I was actually rooting for her to win this award
Mm.
that year. Um, Watching it again, I had been wanting to watch it again anyway. So this gave me a good excuse to revisit it. And I had thoughts. I had so many thoughts. I think this is a bad performance. I
Okay.
I just flat out do not like her performance in this movie. And I was kind of surprised at just how big of a turnaround it was for me. Um
Mm-hmm.
I would not have put her in this lineup. I think she's actively bad here. I and it's not because she's a cis woman playing a trans woman necessarily. I find I find the performance and the film itself rather condescending. I was not out as trans at the time. I'm out as trans now, but and I guess having lived this experience in a very different way now, seeing just how the movie portrays transness and how she specifically portrays it, it just it didn't really set well with me. I was less bothered by the fact that she's a cis woman, as you know, I find it very performative. You know, you mentioned the deepening of the voice. It never really sounds to me like someone who has a deeper voice who is trying to make it higher, which I think is what she's going for. It sounds like someone who is actively trying to deepen their voice. And it to me comes across as very stilted and overly mannered, and she wears the character of Bree almost as a performance of gender. um, she's very fussy. She's constantly checking her makeup and powdering her nose in this little compact. She wears these clothes that she wears almost feels like costumes. It's constantly looking at herself in the mirror, and the way that the movie portrays her as very focused on this gender reassignment surgery just doesn't really ring true to me. And I understand that it is 2005. We are almost 20 years ago at this point. And I think trans people have come a long way, both just as far as acceptance in the general public go, but also as far as how we are portrayed in media. But even so, it reminded me a little bit of the Danish Girl in that way, of just how the entire motivation of this character is to have the gender reassignment surgery. Um, and I think from the get-go, the movie lost me because you have her cisgender doctor who is basically dangling that surgery over her head, that, if she doesn't get this surgery on Friday, it's going to be canceled and she's going to have to wait a year in order to reschedule it. But no, 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 you first have to go reconnect with your long lost gay hustler son before you can have this surgery. And it just seems so unfathomably cruel to me to do something like that, and the movie kind of treats it as this cutesy like little adventure that she's out on. But and that kind of crippling dysphoria is real, but it is a very cisgendered view of what it means to be transgender. I think it is interesting that Huffman has two nude scenes in this film, once with a penis and once without. And that to me just, it feels unnecessary. It's like, okay, you've had the surgery, you're a woman now. As if that's like, that is the goal of being a trans woman, or that is like the final boss of transness, is to get that genital reassignment. And I don't, yes, it was 2005, but man, I feel like the movie is just kind of, I don't want to say it's rotten. I mean, there are parts of it that are sweet. I think Dolly Parton's song "Traveling Through" should have won the Oscar that year. Give
Best
the
part of the
Oscar
movie.
to Dolly. Yeah, those end credits roll, you're like, it's over and I get to listen to Dolly. This is great. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that the very premise of it um, is already a problem, and so it's hard for the performance to shine through that. But I don't think that she helps, because it feels too much like a performance, and that to me suggests that the character herself is performing womanhood, um, and that just felt off to me.
Yeah, very well said. I will first of all just say that I'm always going to have a little bit of fondness for my Desperate Housewives. That is definitely where I first met Felicity, and I do admire her commitment to, on that show, playing a very flawed character and really allowing herself to be seen in a far less glamorous light than her
Mm-hmm.
co-stars. Wasn't necessarily my favorite of the Housewives, but she definitely brought a different kind of energy that I think was needed. And she is that kind of actor's actor type who hasn't been interested in the glamour of Hollywood by any means. And this feels like a film that is something she would be very interested in terms of really getting in there and challenging herself and trying to prove herself as a lead. I respect it as a big swing. I don't think the performance is entirely successful. I think there are parts of it that do work a little bit more for me, like how she is gradually starting to like appreciate her son and sort of come to terms with that part of her past. And I also think she plays the kind of privilege that Brie has in a very compelling way, and how she kind of handles some of the disappointment of how much her mother rejects her. There are elements here that I do understand. It's just that I, sort of like you're saying, don't really buy her as an authentic trans woman. And like, you can obviously speak with more authority than I can, but really I think there's something about the voice that just from the start throws me off. And it's not even just the pitch of it, but it is that it sounds kind of robotic to
Mm-hmm.
me. Like, I get that she's sort of like practicing her voice to sound more like a woman on paper, so like every word choice is careful and precise, but I think she really kind of starts to overdo it to the point that she does lose a bit of humanity for
Mm-hmm.
me. And I don't know, I just don't get quite to the point of crossing that threshold of her disappearing into the character. Like, I don't know how you feel about Hilary Swank in Boys Don't Cry, for example, but like that is one that I respond to a little more, because I feel like Hillary does disappear into that more and have a little bit more humanity with it. So, but this doesn't quite get there for me.
I haven't seen Boys Don't Cry in years, but my memory of that is that it does feel more authentic, and that Hilary Swank is a lot better in that movie than
Yeah.
Felicity Huffman is in this movie. But I agree with you that I do think there are some moments that do ring true for me. I think the relationship with her family, the relationship with her son is actually kind of interesting. I think those are probably the best parts of the movie. Um,
Hmm.
I just it's just hard for me to get past those other things to really enjoy
Yeah.
those elements. I just don't. I didn't really have a connection to Huffman before, and I remember thinking at the time, um, what an incredible performance it was. And I was young and stupid, and that's fine. We all have those moments. Um, but I trying to look at it and trying to figure out what the Oscar voters actually saw in that performance at the time. And I think there's something to be said. They love it when a beautiful actress has a very unglamorous turn. We see that
Hmm.
the previous a year or two before this with Charlize Theron in Monster, which is just an incredible performance. But there is that, like, they love it. They love, for lack of a better term, playing ugly. And I think
D-glam. Yes.
deglam. And I think
Yes.
that rubs me the wrong way a little bit in the context of
Hmm.
this movie. She is made up to look a little more masculine, but almost frumpy, and unglamorous and
Yeah.
unattractive. And it's just it's not cute. And I, it's just I there are other I think there were much better ways to have done what they
Sure.
did.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it, at least in the beginning, what I observed feels very, very self conscious to me, which again, maybe I guess part of the point, but like, I feel like she's been embarking on this process of transitioning for like several years, as we're told.
Mhm.
And there are moments where it kind of feels like she's just beginning that process. I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel quite as accurate as the film maybe thinks it is. So yeah, I don't think the performance is necessarily like a total embarrassment by any means, but I just feel like it's not quite telling the whole story. And also the fact that, so much of the plot is also revolving around Bree being deceptive. I think it comes a little close to playing into some negative stereotypes
Sure, yeah.
about trans people that I think is kind of an unforced error, quite honestly. Um, so yeah, the casting thing, I can sort of look past that and just try to look at it from a 2005 lens
Mhm.
and the film not being great. But I think she is, like I said, like it's tough to sort of separate these different issues because I think on just like a basic character level, I think she's delivering a good emotional performance in terms of like being a person who just found out that they're a parent and just reckoning with that and reckoning with her own parents, and you just kind of like those dual narratives there. I think that part of it, like you said too, I think is the most interesting part. It's just hard to look past the surface level stuff because it is kind of distracting ultimately.
And taking away the strange kind of view of transness that it has, this is a weird movie. It is such a
Yeah.
bizarre story. I mean, listening to you read it back, I'm like, wow, when you say it like that, it's just, yeah, you've got this woman who is a trans woman who is pretending not to be trans, who is trying to take her son, who is a prostitute, cross country. His mother has just killed herself, and they meet all these strange people along the way. But she's also hiding that she's trans by pretending that she's a Christian missionary, and it's just odd. It's so strange, and I don't know if you could have made this movie any other time besides 2005, but it's looking at it in the lens of the time and the way the Academy was at the time. And this is also the year of Brokeback Mountain,
Mm-hmm.
and that was such a groundbreaking thing for the Academy to spotlight a queer romance the way that they do. And then it ultimately doesn't win, and that's a huge controversy. And then you've got Ernest Borgnine out there talking about how he refuses to watch it. And um, I I think it's probably a small miracle she was nominated at all, that they would even touch a movie like this, let alone give it two nominations. But yeah, I guess it was one of those like we're gonna pat ourselves on the back for being oh so progressive. But I think that's kind of the way the movie feels to me because it portrays Brie as a pitiable character. She's someone to be pitied, that we kind of feel sorry for her, that her existence is so terrible because she wants to be in a different body than the one she's in. She wants this surgery, and um, I think it's almost patronizing a little bit. And I think that's kind of the core issue for me about the entire movie is that um, it kind of it feels like they've put trans people in a snow globe and they're looking at them and like, oh, we feel so sorry for them. Their lives must be so hard. And that's this kind of weird liberal paternalism that just feels off-putting. But that also makes sense as why the Academy would want to celebrate something like that, because I feel like there is that strain of Hollywood liberal that wants to pat themselves on the back for showing kindness to the poor, less fortunate trans people.
Yeah. And I think to add on to the sort of cynicism of that, I think if there were a trans actress playing this role, I don't think she would be nominated.
No, no.
So just think that's an interesting thing to think about. But I did want to just return to this idea that I did sort of pick up on. Like, I don't know if the film is entirely conscious of what it's doing necessarily
No.
here, but I think the element of privilege for me is interesting. Like when she goes to her friend in Dallas and it turns out to be like a gender pride party, and Bree is kind of keeping up the charade and like telling Toby that all these women are ersatz and like phony and pretending to be women. It's just for me an interesting sort of cognitive dissonance there that I think, is this rooted in some kind of like self-loathing situation here? Like,
Yeah, and that's really the only time that they touch on that. And that scene is so strange to me. Anyway, I mean, you've got this room full of trans women all sitting around talking about what size dilators they like to use. And it just,
mm-hmm.
you know, if I had $1 for every time we just sat around it, yeah. But I don't there that is an interesting point, is she does kind of have that moment where she's looking down on them somewhat, talking about how they're pretending to be women. um I I wonder what the movie would have looked like if it had confronted its own prejudices in a way by
Yeah.
allowing the character to confront her own self-loathing, but it never really goes there.
Right.
Yeah, it's just kind of, it almost feels like a throwaway.
Yeah. And that's where I thought we were going somewhere interesting just in sort of watching it. And then, yeah, it is so episodic, I think, that
Mhm.
it kind of just drops a lot of threads that could have been compelling. But I do think I do want to pinpoint the little episode we get where she meets Graham Greene as this like rancher, which I think is
It's
kind of sweet
sweet.
just
It
because
is.
it feels like a nice break from all the negativity that she's constantly being pummeled with. You almost wish this film was just about them and just
Mhm.
like this little slice of life kind of thing.
Yeah, there is something sweet about that. And I I think when I first saw it, I kind of wanted her to go back and uh kind of kindle some kind of romance there with him, and that never
Yeah.
happens. But um yeah, that is interesting because I'm not sure if he ever realizes that she's trans. I know her son makes some kind of comment at some point trying to put him off of her. And
Yeah.
he really kind of shrugs it off. It's not a big deal to him at all. And that's probably, I think, the most progressive thing about the movie is that it doesn't try to make a big deal for him. I mean, I feel like any other time, some kind of situation like that would result in the man having some kind of crisis in himself. Oh, I'm in love with a trans woman. What does this mean? Am I gay? Oh my God. And
Yeah.
he's just like, yeah, okay, whatever. And
Yeah.
moves on. And I think that's as close as the movie gets to something that's kind of vaguely progressive, especially for 2005.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think she needs someone like that in her
Mhm.
life. And I mean, to that point, when we do get to her parents' house, where we meet her mother, played by Fiona Flanagan, in this wildly over the top performance that is just like a cartoon character, basically.
I spent that
It's
entire
just,
scene wishing I was watching Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood, which should tell you where I was at with this movie
sure.
at this point.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And watching that, I'm like, maybe this is how Brie became this kind of like privileged and sort of like fussy person who's always just very like prim and just like always self-conscious because she has this for a mother.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think the whole like comedy of errors stuff there is just a little sitcom-y, honestly, where she's just like constantly subjected to all these horrible comments from her family, and she reveals to them that Toby is her son, and her mother nearly tells Toby, and it's just kind of like a little goofy, honestly. Even the scene where they go out to dinner is like very broad and sitcom-y, I think. I don't know what your take was on that
It is very
sequence.
broad, and
Yeah.
that whole thing at the dinner thing gets a bit silly, and you've got this over the top shouting match going on, and everybody kind of staring at them, and but those scenes actually do kind of get at something that's kind of real,
Mm-hmm.
just for the fact that it's played so over the top that it's almost hard to take it seriously, but it does have those moments where just the casual misgendering and the
Yeah.
constant dead naming, and I mean, those things are real, especially when you're with a family who they don't even have to be transphobes. They just might not get it, or they may just be having trouble accepting it, or whatever that looks like. And sometimes that can hurt worse than 100 J.K. Rowling tweets. And so I think that the movie kind of acknowledges that is interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and it's kind of played for broad comedy, so it never really has the courage to really examine these things that it brings up in a way
Yeah.
that's not kind of ironic or couched in these sight gags that tend to be at her expense, which is just a bit
Yeah.
frustrating to watch.
Yeah. And that's part of like, I think in her performance, she is kind of like silently having to bear all of this just
Mhm.
on her face, which I think is effective. It's just the tone of the scenes are so silly that it's hard to really, feel that with her, I
Right.
guess. And also the scene where Toby tries to kiss her is fascinating, just to see her kind of like navigating her way through how she now is realizing, okay, I have no choice now. I have to tell him the truth that, you know, I'm your parent. And she says he's going to hate her for this. And she just like rips the band aid off. And he reacts violently, which I think is also kind of sadly rooted in truth with what a lot of trans people experience when the other person feels like they've been deceived in some way. And she just kind of tries to sort of silently go on after that as best she can because he runs away and she may never see him again. And, I think some of the constant trauma of that, I think, weighs on her face in a way that is effective for me, but it is just like kind of relentless after a while.
Sure. And another thing about the movie, I mean, Kevin Zegers in this movie is hot for one, but I mean the movie makes a lot out of
Yes,
he
it does.
yes, they linger on his body. He's in his
Mm-hmm.
underwear a lot, he's shirtless a lot, and he's kind of the eye candy of the movie, um and it is even in that scene with Graham Greene how they never really let Brie be a sexual being. In this movie, it's her
Yeah.
son that is this sexual being. Um, and the only action she gets is accidentally kissing her son later in the movie. That she's never really
Yeah.
allowed to.
Good point.
Yeah, she's very very chaste, and I guess that goes back into that genital dysphoria that they're focusing on so much in the movie that she almost can't even um, think about sex as long as her genitals are what they are. But that's just part of, I think, the movie's weird POV and weird almost focus on that genital dysphoria that is not always there.
Yeah. And to what you were saying before, I think the two scenes of nudity with her, I do think is just very unnecessary. Not to be one of those people who's saying no nude scenes in films, but I think in this case, like it just feels kind of gratuitous in a way that is genuinely
It
unnecessary.
feels
I don't
weird.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, she does finally get the surgery, but as we see, she's not quite as happy as she expected because she has that fractured relationship with Toby, and her therapist comes in and she just kind of sobs and drools all over the place in this very raw way,
Yeah.
which I think is a divisive scene for people because it's kind of like she's withheld so much throughout the film, and now she's finally kind of allowed to, like, you can breathe now, Simon, you can breathe now, Bree,
Hmm.
in this way that is, I guess, a nice kind of like climactic moment for her to finally release all that tension.
I mean, it's a great Oscar clip, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what they used. But yeah, it's that one scene. Everybody has to have that one scene.
Yes. Yes.
But and maybe they are getting at some. It is weird to me that they spend the whole movie focusing on the gender reassignment surgery, and the in the end that it doesn't make her happy, that it's not the gender journey. It was the real transition was the friends we made along the way
Yeah.
with her with
Literally, that is kind
yes.
of what it's saying.
but, but it's I don't really have a lot of other thoughts on that scene other than
Yeah.
the point is reconciling with her son, and the gender journey is they're trying to say that it's kind of secondary to all of that, but that's really not necessarily what they focused on up until that point.
I think this is a film that could have been really fascinating. Like, if we were to, say, remake it 20 years later with a trans actress and with a broader understanding of the trans experience, maybe,
Mhm.
could be very compelling film.
I feel like it would be more controversial now, interestingly enough, just
Mm,
because, like I said earlier, I think trans people have come a long way when it comes to acceptance, but with the greater acceptance comes a lot of greater pushback. And so I think,
yeah.
we saw what happened with Bud Light just because they had a trans woman record a TikTok. Um,
Yeah.
and I I don't remember a lot of controversy about Transamerica because I don't know if Fox News knew it existed. They were focused on Brokeback Mountain at the time, but
That is true.
um,
Yeah.
but it would be interesting to see what it would look like today. I think someone like Alexandra Billings would be great
Mm,
in this role. I would love to see what she could do with something like this. And
yeah.
just kind of,
Trace the set.
yeah, just kind of taking it and refocusing a little bit. I think there is perhaps something interesting there. I just feel like the perspective of it is off. So
Yeah.
to
It would need a very big rewrite.
right.
I'm not saying like transplant this
Right. We're not going to
directly,
Gus
but
Van Sant
right.
psycho this thing, but yeah,
No,
to,
no, no.
to
God.
to reframe it a little bit, I think could be
Right.
interesting.
Yeah. So just throwing that out there. So interesting discussion. Felicity, her performance, I think I understand why she had a lot of fans at the time.
Mhm.
It is a very, very transformative performance, quite literally. And she gets a lot of compelling, like, so much of the film, I think, is broad, dramatic showcase. I just think looking back on it, it's not as deep for me
Right.
as it may have felt in 2005.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to our next
All
nominee?
right.
Big transition to this one. Here we go. Keira Knightley in Pride and Prejudice. Alrighty, so here's Keira Knightley getting her first Oscar nomination at the age of 20. She was actually the third youngest actress to receive a nomination in this category in Oscar history, behind Isabella Adjani and Keisha Castle Hughes. So Keira was born in London, and she started acting from a very early age in commercials and TV movies. She appeared in Star Wars: The Phantom Menace in 1999, where she was cast because she kind of bore a resemblance to Natalie Portman, and she's playing like a kind of decoy for Padme in that. After that, she stars in smaller films before she has her big breakthrough moment in Bend It Like Beckham, which came out in the US in early 2003. And then the rest of 2003 is when she becomes a major star because she also had one of the lead roles in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, playing Elizabeth Swann. Both that and Bend It Like Beckham, she's showing her athletic skills and her physicality. She's also in Love Actually in 2003. But after that year, she's fully in demand as the kind of it teen girl in movies. She gets a role as Guinevere in King Arthur, another sort of physical action part. Same with Domino in 2005. And then she's cast here in Pride and Prejudice, largely because she had what the director Joe Wright called a tomboy image, and for her lively mind and sense of humor. And he thought that that would make her the perfect Elizabeth Bennet. So this is based on the Jane Austen novel Pride and Prejudice, which had been adapted into a miniseries in the 90s, and there had been many adaptations dating all the way back to the 40s, where Greer Garson played the role. This is only the second feature film after that 1940 version, so it had been quite a while in terms of a big screen adaptation. So, Pride and Prejudice is about the Bennet family living in the late 18th century. So, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have 5 daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, and each of them is expected to find a husband as they reach a certain age. And Elizabeth, played by Keira, is an independent-minded and kind of like bookish girl and tends to speak her mind. She meets Mr. Darcy, played by Matthew Macfadyen, who seems kind of standoffish at first, so she starts off hating him, but over time she lets go of her pride and her kind of assumptions about him and realizes his true heart and that they actually may belong together. So there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but I don't want to get too bogged down in all the details of this text. So, curious if you had any kind of relationship with Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen and what you think of this adaptation, Keira Knightley overall, and her performance here.
I love, 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 love this movie. I think this is far and away the best movie in this category this year.
We are so back.
Yes. I just think it's beautiful. I think it's just ravishing, so romantic. It's I think she is incredible in this, and watching it again, I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen the movie. But man, this just feels like a Star is Born performance to me. And, I know 2003 was kind of the year she really kind of appeared on the map with Pirates and Love Actually. But to me, this kind of feels like her moment. This is like, oh, this is what she can do. And I don't really think that she necessarily had the career that maybe she could have after this, or that maybe she deserved. But I think she's perfect in this. It's just such a charming, effortless performance. I remember watching it at the time and just being so enraptured by it. I really didn't know what to expect. I had not read the novel. I was not familiar with the story going into it. And I was just so taken with it. Watching it now in just, a week or so after Donald Sutherland's death,
Yeah.
I think he's just so charming here as her father, and that scene at the end with the two of them, it just, I
Yeah.
I think it's just it's a beautiful piece of work.
It is. Yeah. And for me, I will say Keira Knightley was a big deal when I was growing up. I first saw her in Pirates of the Caribbean and fell in love with her, and like really like big crush, honestly.
Mhm.
And I just thought she was so cool. And it was funny to see her kind of transition from being the action star blockbuster type of actress to the prestige period piece
Mhm.
era of like Keira Knightley is always going to be in a corset, like rarely doing anything contemporary. And maybe I slightly lost interest over time, but I definitely had a soft spot for her. But I think, I watched this film like a little bit later, definitely not in 2005, but she was a huge part of my fondness for the film. And to me, it is reminiscent of like Winona Ryder in Little Women,
Mhm.
where it's just like right actress at the exact right time to play a classic character from literature and just being so in the pocket. And this is even for me stronger than, you know, the work that Winona did in Little Women, not to compare them, but this is a very, I think, complex performance. And there's a lot that is asked of her to be charming and winning, but still kind of flawed and prejudiced and complicated, and to make her relationship with Darcy evolve in a way that feels kind of natural, and also to be, you know, attracted to him, like even though, as Joe Wright and others have said, like they didn't want like a dashing hero type for Darcy, and Matthew Macfadyen is still a good looking guy, but not necessarily like the first choice that you'd expect maybe for the role. You know, like it's not like her and Orlando Bloom together, for example, where it's just like,
Right.
oh, of course they love each other because they're hot, you know. For me, she is just so effortlessly charming and
Mhm.
so easy to care about, and she has that kind of timeless, almost like a Audrey Hepburn type of grace to
Mhm.
her, you know, but also that kind of like fun little adventurous quality too that's just fun to watch. And I think, you know, just to speak broadly about this lineup, you have a few other examples here of actresses definitely leveling up their careers with their
Yes. Mhm.
performances, and probably knowing that there was a big risk and like a big chance to prove their skills. And to me, Keira Knightley is the one who fully succeeds in doing that from all of them.
Yeah, I was surprised at I had forgotten that Rosamund Pike is in this, and Jenna Malone and
Yeah.
Carey Mulligan. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
stacked cast, and that's not even talking
Brenda
about
Blethyn.
Brenda
Yeah.
Blethyn and Judi Dench and Penelope Wilton
Yeah.
and
So
uh,
much best actress representation in this movie. There's like five actresses. I love it.
yeah, it is a stacked cast, and a lot of these people are not stars yet, and they're going to become
Mm-hmm.
pretty big in the coming years. Um, and you know, you're right about Darcy. I don't think Matthew Macfadyen was the best looking man in that cast. I think Rupert Friend as Wickham, I think, is probably more conventionally attractive, but
Right.
you know, it's something else in him that she sees, and I think that really gets in the heart of what the text is trying to say. And I you know, I've not seen the miniseries from the 90s, but I know it remains fairly popular, especially Colin Firth in that role. And I think Matthew Macfadyen's take is probably a bit different. Um,
Yep.
but I think there's something about, not to say that he's not good looking, he's a very handsome man, but
Yeah.
I do think that, you know, that he's got that kind of rough around the edges, dangerous quality to him,
Mm-hmm.
that masks something much more tender underneath.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you see her really responding to that and seeing that there might be something more
Mhm.
there. And to me, there's never a doubt with Kira that she belongs in this era. And like
Oh
again,
yeah.
you can understand why so many directors would be like, "Okay, you are the period piece girl." Like after this, and maybe start to be typecast. But I think she gets the cadence of
Mhm.
the dialogue really well, which is probably not easy, you know, wrapping your mouth around all that Jane Austen dialogue. And she does have that just like perfect blend of like the classic romantic lead protagonist, independent minded, charming, beautiful but still relatable, all these different things that sort of come together in this sort of X Factor way. That just another one that I think makes it look easier than it probably was.
I was just struck in my revisit of it, I
Mm.
think that Joe Wright would go on to make more ambitious movies, more formally inventive movies, and like Atonement and Anna Karenina. But this one, I think this is his best one. I think it's
Yeah.
just it's straightforward, but it makes the text so real and relatable. And you know, they're speaking that Austen dialogue, but they make it sound so natural and real, and it doesn't feel stuffy at all to me. It just you understand, even in you're in this world where the social mores are so different, and the way that people fell in love or the people got married were so different, but it makes all that just make perfect sense. Like you accept that this is the world that they're in, and it just feels very natural. And I mean, it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous movie to look at, but there are so many touches that I just really zeroed in on this time. The way the camera just kind of moves through the Bennett house, in these long fluid takes where people are kind of coming in and out. And there's that scene where she's on the swing, and twirling around on the swing and just letting the world kind of twirl around her. And it's so unassuming, and it's so simple, but it's just so beautiful. I mean, it's something that you would think a girl of her age would do. She's just going to kind of lose herself in her thoughts, twirling on the swing, and the movie just kind of takes the time to let her do that, and let her kind of just exist in this reverie. And I think it's so beautiful. It's one of those, they don't make them like this anymore kind of movies.
I know. As I said it in my Letterboxd review, remember when movies used to look this good and sound this good and feel this good? Like, it's just such a sensory
Yeah.
experience, I think. Yeah, and even in those subtler moments of her starting to connect with him, like when he takes her hand to help her into the carriage at one point, which
Mhm.
is a very kind of sensual moment
Yeah.
because, like, this being the time period it is, it's you rarely get that kind of a touch.
Right. Yeah.
um and even in that moment, like when he's just like doing that thing with his hand,
Hmm.
like all very, very subtle detail that really fills in the relationships. And I think also at the dance when she bumps into him and she's almost like stunned into silence and she agrees to dance with him. I love the moment where she goes off to the side with like maybe one of her friends or sisters. I don't know who it is, but she's like, did I just agree to dance with Mr. Darcy? Like this man I've said I would loathe for all of eternity. Just really playful, kind of like girlish
Hmm.
quality there that really works. And again, they very playfully banter, but it definitely starts to deepen over the course of the dance as she's asking about this other guy, Wickham, who she might be involved with, a Rupert friend, who she finds herself maybe drawn to as a romantic prospect for the moment at least. And Darcy doesn't provide any clarity and seems very sullen and all that, but that just is like drawing her in more to sort of figure him out, like puzzle him out in a way. Like I just love the time that is devoted to very gradually getting us to that beautiful climactic ending. You know, it puts in the work.
Like a young Mrs. Henderson and Vivian Van Dam.
Well, there you have it. She wishes, Mrs.
Yes,
Henderson.
yes. But oh yeah, the finale. I mean, just I remember leaving the theater and being like, I have to go buy this soundtrack on a CD.
The
Remember
oh my
those?
god, yes. Oh.
Like, oh, it's yeah, it's just such a just enchanting moment. I mean, you've got the
Mm-hmm.
dawn, the fog, the moors,
Yeah.
it's you can just feel it. You want to crawl inside it and kind of live in it. And I think I said this in my letterbox review of it as well. It feels like it's kind of a a chilly morning, and there's just a little bit of fog outside, and you're curled up under a blanket and you've got a good book. I mean, that's the way this movie feels, and it's so
Yeah.
tactile, you can almost feel it.
Mm-hmm. And another great example of that is the scene that is in the rain, which is
Mhm.
kind of, I think, one of her most famous scenes in the film. So, just to kind of set it up, we get to her being told by the colonel that Darcy kind of maybe had a hand in ending, I think, Jane's relationship with Bingley. And in her eyes, it's sort of like ending her sister's opportunity for happiness and success. And the scene of her confronting Darcy in the rain, her and Matthew McFadden like fully locked in, and her sort of growing anger at him, especially when he starts to insult her family and how they're, you know, their impropriety, I
Mhm.
think he says. It's riveting just to watch her just kind of emotionally getting angrier and angrier. I love the line. I just fully wrote down the whole line because I just love it so much, where she says, "From the first moment I met you, your arrogance and conceit, your selfish disdain of the feeling of others made me realize that you were the last man in the world I could ever be prevailed upon to marry."
And that's a
And
mouthful.
again, just like the cadence of that,
Yeah.
it's just like being able to do that and not have it sound overly rehearsed, I guess. There is a precision to it that I think is very impressive.
Yeah, she absolutely makes you believe that. And that's not a way that anybody even remotely speaks like anymore. But,
Right.
you know, but she digs into that poetry and she makes it beautiful, but also believable. You absolutely believe that this is something that's just occurring to her and rolling off her tongue just like that.
Yeah. So then, of course, over time, when she starts to realize maybe the error in her ways, when she notices how lovingly Jane and Bingley are looking at each other towards the end, and she admits to Jane that she was so foolish to think that, from her perspective, that there wasn't love between them. I think her guilt there is very genuine, and you feel this love for her sister. I mean, it sounds very cheesy the way I'm describing it, but it really feels very authentic in that classic sort of, I hate to keep bringing it up again, but in that classic sort of Little Women sisterly way.
No, I mean, Little Women is an apt comparison. I kept thinking about that
Yeah.
94, I believe, Little
Mm-hmm.
Women a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and I love Greta Gerwig's Little Women as well, but there is that sort of almost autumnal feeling um, to the
Mm-hmm.
94 film that's just, I think, so lovely. And I think Pride and Prejudice fits into that kind of feeling perfectly. They're very stately kind of period pieces, but they never feel stuffy or stiff in any way. They just they really find a sort of modern humanity that I think contemporary audiences
Yeah.
can connect to in those kind of alien worlds that come from a long time ago. But I do think they make interesting companion pieces
Yeah.
just for their very similar sorts of style and feeling.
The only other scene I wanted to mention is where we have Lady Catherine, played by Judi Dench here, her fellow nominee in this category, coming to the house and like demanding that she not enter any sort of engagement with Darcy,
Mhm.
aka her nephew. Fantastic scene from both of them, both firing on all cylinders. I mean, like Keira Knightley is like 20 years old, probably 19, honestly, when she's playing it,
Yeah,
and like fully standing up to Judi Dench and holding her own, standing her ground. I love it.
I feel like she deserves the Oscar just for that alone. I mean, I would be so
Yeah,
intimidated going up
I
against
know.
Judi Dench
Yeah,
that just to be able to not show that kind of
crumble.
intimidation. Yeah, it's just like
I know.
I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah, so really, really love this nomination. Glad that it happened. I think this is one that was definitely on the bubble.
Mhm.
Like, it could have easily not happened. She was maybe the fifth place in terms of getting a
I
nomination.
I think so. That's
Yeah,
what's so strange to me
yeah,
is I feel like she's the one that barely made it in by the skin of her teeth, which is
yeah.
wild when
But
you look at the rest of that lineup.
yeah, but she should have been a constant
Yes.
throughout the season. So, anyway, good job, Kira. I'm sad that I don't get to talk about her again because this is her only lead nomination as of now, but
Never say never. There's still time.
never say never. There's still time. Yeah, I mean, like, she's not even 40 yet. So, like, we forget again how young she is
Yes.
still. Okay, let's move on to our final losing nominee, Charlize Theron in North Country. So, Charlize is getting her follow up nomination to her win 2 years ago for Monster. And I think what's interesting about this is that North Country is directed by Nikki Caro, who directed Keisha Castle Hughes and Whale Rider from that same year of Monster. I love whenever we have instances of that sort of thing where we sort of have these people going through award season together and choosing to work together in the future. So that's kind of what happened here. But North Country is another intense, committed role for Charlize, and it's based on a true story, specifically this landmark case of Jensen versus Eveleth Taconite Company. It was the first class action sexual harassment lawsuit in the US, which was filed in the late 80s by Lois Jensen with support from her other female employees at a mine in Minnesota. So, North Country is a fictionalized account loosely based on the case, and Charlize is playing Josie Ames, kind of a stand in for Lois, who escapes her abusive husband and goes with her two kids back to her hometown in Minnesota. And it becomes clear, based on how people treat her and talk to her, that this is a very conservative town, and even her parents don't really support her at first. Eventually, with help from her childhood friend Glory, played by Frances McDormand, she gets a job at a local mine where she is one of few female employees, and all of them face sexual harassment to varying degrees from their male coworkers, especially Josie, from another childhood classmate of hers, played by Jeremy Renner. And over time, Josie finds that she can't take it anymore and brings her concerns to her bosses, who try to sweep it under the rug, but she persists anyway and brings them to court. So let's talk Charlize Theron, thoughts on Charlize as an actress overall, and North Country.
Well, Charlize is always great. I think that Monster is an all-timer win. I think she's an incredible actress. I, I I think she's very good here. I understand why she's nominated. I feel like the movie's it's fine. I like it okay. I don't love it. I feel like there are other similar kinds of films like Silkwood that I think are better. But it does. It's one of those like we're going to tell an important story and we're going to be very serious about it. This kind of um, muckraking sort of drama. It's fairly bleak. um, it's
Yeah.
hard to watch at times. I feel like Charlize is doing a very strong job here. I don't really have a lot. It's one of those movies that you watch it and you're like, I don't have a lot of strong feelings about this one way or the other. I think it's solid, but I don't love it. I also don't hate it. And I feel kind of strangely that way about her performance. Like she's strong here, but I think coming off of Monster, it was like, all right, we're going to get another nomination for Charlize where she's doing a lot of ugly crying and doing a lot of like really hard, dark, going to this like really guttural places, and nobody can do it quite as good as she can. She's so good. But I also, she's deglammed here, not to the extent that she is in Monster, but I feel like it's not too far removed from what she's doing in Monster.
Yeah, I think this is a very reliable, committed performance from Charlize. I
Mhm.
think it's a film where you do feel the passion and you feel the investment from everyone involved in sort of telling this story in a way
Mhm.
with care. I think there are times when it becomes a little broad, honestly, with how even like some of the men are depicted. And I don't doubt that like a lot of the real life women faced very similar situations that we see in the film.
Mhm.
To me, it does play a little two dimensional where I feel like there is gray area there more often than not. But there are elements like when we see how the other women are very reluctant to support her that I think is sadly a very real thing
Mhm.
that can happen in a workplace, especially in small towns like this where it's like everyone's for themselves, everyone's paycheck to paycheck. But there is a part of me that wishes it dug a little deeper. It is just a little surface level at times. And I think it is,
Yeah.
like you said, trying to be in the vein of quite a few other films that we've talked about on this show, like Norma Ray or Silkwood or even Aaron
Mhm.
Brockovich, in terms of like blue collar drama about social issues, small town, one woman against the system. And I think this is a step down from
Yes.
those films. I mean, I think she is good here, but for me, it's not what it could have been. I think maybe it's just the script that doesn't really, for me, define her beyond her struggles and how other people treat her. Maybe that's part of the point that, like, she's always just had to deal with people giving her shit all her life. And, like, so she barely has, like, a defined personality for herself. But I found it strangely two dimensional, despite being given like a lot of opportunities, I think, to show her skills. Like it's very surface level to me.
Yeah, I agree. She is kind of defined by her victimhood, in a
Yeah.
way. And yes, she's the one woman standing against the system, but it's not. You really don't get to know her on a deeper level than that. Um,
Yeah.
and the movie doesn't really go. much beyond that. I was struck watching this again, because again, I saw it when it came out and I haven't seen it since. And so many of the things that I was expecting to happen, I was actually remembering Silkwood. uh, I kept waiting on certain things to happen. I was like, wait a minute, was that in Silkwood? I think that was in Silkwood. Um, but what was interesting to me about this is Sissy Spacek showing up,
Yeah.
basically doing In the Bedroom all over again. I felt like it almost felt like
Yeah.
I kept waiting on Tom Wilkinson to walk in the room and
She smashes another plate.
you let him get away with everything. I yeah, that seems to me to be almost like a waste of Sissy Spacek to put her in such
Yeah.
a kind of
Very
throwaway.
overqualified. Yeah.
Yes, she's just playing the mom. Like, was Celia Weston not available? Like, what are we doing?
Ugh.
But I love
Yes.
Celia.
Where's Margot Martindale?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the first part of the film before she is like reuniting with Glory and she's recruited to work in the mine and everything. It's a lot of dealing with like these small town judgmental kind of assholes and their very conservative values that she doesn't align with, including
Mhm.
her own parents, like you said, who again like barely show concern for the fact that her husband beat her up. And I think she just tries to move past it. Like she occasionally makes little comments about their bullshit, but I like in a way that she doesn't really express like shock or like outrage because this is just the culture that she kind of grew up in.
Mhm.
So she kind of expects this from these people. So I appreciate that it's not just like, oh, how dare you not support me? It's just like, of course you don't, you know?
Yeah.
So to your point, it is bleak, but realistic in its own way.
I think there is, there's certainly a degree of realism in there. It's obviously very heightened. You've got that moment at the end, when people finally start to believe her. They start to realize when Jeremy Renner finally comes clean and admits that he actually did witness her being raped, and so people start to realize, oh, she's not this floozy that we've
Mm.
kind of conjured in our minds, as if that mattered as far as
Right.
how she's being treated. But people realize, oh, this woman's actually been through a lot, and that this is we're railroading her essentially. So you've got that kind of I am Spartacus moment where everybody starts standing up in the courtroom, which seems it's a bit much. It's a bit
Mhm.
much.
Yeah.
It's a nice moment, I guess, but you're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We're pushing a
Very
little too
cheesy.
hard. Yes.
Yep. I do also want to talk about one of her bigger scenes, which is when she is at the hockey game that her son is playing in. And I think it's Jeremy Renner's character. I don't remember the character's name. His wife comes over and just unloads on her in front of
Mhm.
everyone that she's a whore who lit on her husband and all this. And
Mhm.
her son hears, everyone in this crowd basically hears. And it's a whole scene. And like her son's girlfriend's mom says he wants to stay over there. And she just storms out and like drags her son out of the car.
Yeah.
Big moment. I think you definitely feel the embarrassment on her
Oh
face,
yeah.
but how she just has like, she's just like, I have nothing to lose at this point. Like the whole town thinks I'm a whore. So she just shouts at them all and is just like, giving them a show,
Are you not
which,
entertained?
yes. I think she actually would do something very similar to this in Young Adult, which is a much better performance of being just kind of like, making a scene in front of everyone. I don't know if you remember that or have seen it, but you know, I think
I've
that
not
is,
actually seen Young Adult.
you
But
should get on
I will
that.
have to. I was thinking about that the other day after watching Lisa Frankenstein of all things. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
I would like to check out Young Adult at some point.
Yeah, really one of her best. But yeah, the whole thing of sort of seeing how entrenched this town is in protecting their boys club,
Mhm.
to where again like even the women are not really supporting her out of protection of their jobs. And even when like Jeremy Renner's character starts to abuse her and it's very plain on her face what's happened, she has bruises, but no one wants to get involved, and just like the exhaustion just keeps like sinking into her. And it's like scenes like that, like you can see why so many women don't report these things, because
Sure.
it wears you down, and people are gaslighting you. Even the people who said that they would look out for you are not being legit. So yeah, that part of it I think is very sadly accurate.
Oh yeah, that's all very
But yeah,
real, and I think you really get that sense in the movie. I mean, I think there are times when it is overstating its case for sure, but
yeah,
um, that idea of why the women do not speak up, because they know they'll be retaliated against, and they are in this kind of boys club where they rely on this place for employment, and speaking out against the injustices that they're facing um, could ruin their livelihood, their family's livelihood. It's very good about illustrating why people often don't come forward, especially in like a pre-Me Too world. Um,
mm,
this, we're 15 years out from that at this point, 10 years, I guess, but it kind of really shows like this is why people don't come forward. Not only are they not believed, but they're retaliated against, and I think that's still a reality today. But the movie, it's not subtle about it, but you
yeah.
you definitely understand why nobody wants to rock this boat.
Yeah. And so I think in that way it is quite advanced for its time, I
Mm,
suppose. The one other scene I think is good for her is when she has this scene on the porch, I think is where they are, where she has this heart to heart with her son,
mm,
which is really, I think, kind of lovely when they finally talk about the fact that his father was a rapist,
mm.
and she just kind of reassures him and says like, you had nothing to do with that ugliness, and really just reassuring him and trying to move forward and reconciling with him. I think that's a nice emotional moment in a film that I wish gave her more as an individual person beyond her trauma.
It's definitely a more low-key moment in a movie that's full of a lot of like heightened emotions, or more
Yeah.
intense emotions anyway. So having something like that really gives her a chance to dig into something that's maybe a little deeper. And you've
Yeah.
also got Frances McDormand, who's also nominated for
Mm-hmm.
Best Supporting Actress that year, doing some strong work alongside of her. But then I feel like it becomes a performance about the disability that she ends up with. She's got Lou Gehrig's disease. And I don't think I mean, it's fine. She's fine. I just don't think it's one of Frances McDormand's standout amongst her Oscar nominations. She's
Yeah.
had a
It's
lot
a
of
little
great.
bit like you said with Judi Dench, kind of doing it in her sleep.
Yes,
She
yeah,
could do this kind of Midwestern thing very
yeah.
well by this point. Yeah.
um, but those smaller moments are nice, and they give you a break
Mm-hmm.
from the big bombastic overtones of the rest of the movie.
I think so. So this is solid work from Charlize. I don't know if I would have personally nominated it, but you can definitely see why it was. Like, this is very much up the Academy's alley,
Mm.
especially in the afterglow of Monster.
I think that's probably why she got nominated. Just
Yeah.
it was okay. This was not a fluke. Good job. You're still around.
Yes.
Yeah, at a
You made
girl.
the right choice.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Shall we move on to our winner?
All right, let's do it.
Reese Witherspoon in Walk the Line. Okay, Reese Witherspoon winning on her first Oscar nomination. And I mean, not only the Oscar, just like fully sweeping award season with this performance in Walk the Line. So to introduce her first, Reese Witherspoon, born in Louisiana, fully raised in the South, and her first acting gig was The Man in the Moon, for which she auditioned for a small part, but she ended up impressing them so much that they cast her as the lead. And from there, she took on some TV movie roles and went on to appear in films throughout the 90s like Freeway, Fear, Twilight, Pleasantville. And then 1999 is when she really enters a new era because she is in Cruel Intentions as well as Election, which gets her first real awards recognition on a major level with a Golden Globe nomination and an Independent Spirit Award nomination. And she really takes off from there. She's in American Psycho, and then she has her huge starring role in Legally Blonde. So that is huge for her as well. She was kind of praised as the next big female star. Sweet Home Alabama is also big for her. Legally Blonde 2 is made. She tries to go for some more prestige fare in 2004 with Vanity Fair, which isn't entirely successful. But then in 2005, she had another rom-com, Just Like Heaven, and then Walk the Line, which really was another leveling up moment for her, and she got universal praise for her performance. So Walk the Line, music biopic about the life and career of the country singer Johnny Cash, played here by Joaquin Phoenix, and how he eventually struggled with drug and alcohol addiction and met June Carter, Reese, a fellow country music star, while touring, and they began a complex relationship that over a long period of time eventually resulted in marriage. So let's talk our winner here, Reese Witherspoon. Walk the Line. Tell me your overall thoughts on Miss Witherspoon and her Oscar-winning performance.
I mean, this is one of those like right role, right time sort of
Mm-hmm.
situations, I feel like, because she was really just one of the it stars of the early 2000s. And so this was her welcome to the big dance, I think, from the Academy. Just I mean, she had not really done anything that was quote unquote serious other than Vanity Fair, which I don't know if you've seen Vanity Fair, but it's very dull.
Yeah.
It's but you know she's a star at this point. It's kind of like George Clooney and Syriana. They're like, okay, you've got the box office, everybody loves you, so we're going to give you an award now. Congratulations. And it's a very sassy, spunky, go get 'em kind of character. It's fun, it's cute. I don't think it's like an all-timer performance. I think she's perfectly serviceable in it. She does a solid job. I think the movie is kind of boring overall. Um, but yeah, and it's one of those. It's she's definitely playing the wife. This is Johnny Cash's
Mm-hmm.
story. And he is the focus of it. And I know I took a peek at some of the questions we're going to be asked from the audience later, and I saw this point raised a few times. So not to go into that too deeply yet, but it really isn't. She's not the focus of the story. She is the quote unquote female lead here, but she's not. It's not her story. I think it reminds me a little bit of Renee Zellweger's win for Cold Mountain, where it's like, oh, she's doing this like uh, cute country spunky lady sort of role, but I think it was one of those kind of zeitgeist moments that was too hard for the Academy to ignore.
Fair enough. Yeah. Reese Witherspoon is an interesting one for me. I've been pretty neutral overall on Reese as an actress. She's obviously incredibly talented at what she does, and I respect how she's definitely found her lane nowadays as
Mhm.
like a producer and honestly like a businesswoman straight up in creating, these shows for women, and she has her book club and everything. Like she has this little mini empire to
Yeah.
herself now. And I think she's also very protective of her brand, which is fine, and I get it. But there are times when I wish she would go a little darker with her roles. Like she's kind of doing that a little bit on the morning show, but not entirely. She did that, I think, successfully with Wilds and a few other roles, but I think I like when she's not afraid to come across as a little unlikable. Like Big Little Lies is my favorite performance of
Yes.
hers,
Yeah. Mhm.
honestly. And even though she does have a lot of good, like, funny moments. So it's a little up and down for me with Reese. I think with Walk the Line, it's a role that really suits her well.
Mhm.
And I think it is a successful performance that I think in some instances does show her savviness in terms of sort of like weaponizing her southern charm. And I had also forgotten how much she changed her voice too, because I hadn't seen this in at least a decade, honestly. But she, I think, kind of nails the voice of June Carter. Like she's singing, she's doing her own singing, she
Mhm.
plays the auto harp, and all of that is convincing, I would
Yeah.
say. I think she also has the kind of energy and the sort of verve of an entertainer. And I feel like even though she doesn't really get the opportunity to dig super deep into June so much as be the support system for Johnny Cash, I really do enjoy her performance. I think She has pretty good chemistry with Joaquin Phoenix, which is not what I would have thought going into it. And so I actually do like her performance, and I think she is charming, and I do find myself missing her when she is not on screen because,
Yes.
to your point, the movie gets very dull in patches, and for me those are when she is not there.
Sure, yeah. I have not actually seen Walk Hard, but I'm familiar enough with it that I feel like it has forever ruined Walk the Line. Um,
Yeah.
even if you're not actually seen Walk Hard, just it's Walk Hard is absolutely your basic, or I'm sorry, Walk the Line is absolutely your basic Oscar bait biopic, musical biopic sort of movie. It's I feel like it's
Yeah.
very paint by numbers, but you know, Reese Witherspoon isn't doing anything really groundbreaking here. She's not. She's very much in her comfort zone. This is her lane, but she owns that lane and she owns it well. And it's hard not to like what she's doing here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she finally enters about like 30 minutes into the film when he meets her backstage, and it is like this kind of like burst of energy that
Mhm.
the film kind of needs by that point, and is like bumping into him and gets her dress tangled in his guitar, and it's sort of love at first sight for him. But for her, I like how it is kind of established in her performance and in her tone that she is very focused on her job, and
Right.
that her job being as an entertainer and doing this fun little bit of like yelling out so that the crowd can hear her, and like takes on this kind of tone of being like, oh, I'm just like the country bumpkin kind of
Mhm.
thing, and saying, oh, I got laryngitis so I can't sing and all this stuff. It's kind of a charming introduction, and she does have this very like inherent spitfire energy that I think is just like, that's just in her as Reese. So
Yeah.
it's like half the battle is already there. Like she's already there.
It made me feel like she would make a great Dolly Parton if they ever decide to make a Dolly Parton
Sure.
movie. That
Yeah,
Reese should be on the short list for Oscar #2, maybe.
I love that. But do you think, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the voice, because I definitely noticed it in the beginning. Like she has a little bit of a raspiness there
Mhm.
that she doesn't usually have. So it definitely is a choice. But for me, it doesn't feel forced at
Mm-mm.
all, like it maybe does with Felicity and with
No,
her
yeah,
choices
it
with her
it
voice.
again, I think it's something that's very in her wheelhouse. I don't think it doesn't feel like a put on. It feels there's a natural kind of effervescence to it. And she does kind of
Yeah.
have that gravelly country um sort of vibe that June Carter had,
Hmm.
that raspiness that you talked about, that I think that really kind of gets at the personality that June would put across in her performances. I had forgotten how dark this movie is. Um,
Yeah.
I it's kind of strange in that it is it's almost afraid of its own darkness because I mean, Johnny Cash is not likable in this movie, but it feels like the movie
No.
thinks he is. So that's what it there's this weird tension between what he's doing and what the movie wants you to feel about what he's doing. And I'm like, he's kind of a dick. Like he's really not a nice person. And it still feels like this biopic of the great man and the woman who stood by him. Um, so
Yeah.
it's very odd in that way. And I wish it had kind of not been afraid of that darkness and gone deeper into that and really kind of wrestled with Johnny Cash's demons more than it does. But I wish she had had more to chew on, but I think she's fun.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I agree, just in watching it, how by the end you are almost wondering like, why is she still even
Girl, leave
just
him.
trying to stick
Like,
it?
what are
Girl,
you
leave him.
doing?
That is the vibe that you get towards the third act of this movie, truly.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know. It was a different time. I don't
Yeah.
know. Um, but I think the one thread that I found really interesting with her, though, is she, like, when he first tries to kiss her in the beginning, and she kind of is like letting him down gently, knowing she kind of does like him, but also she says, oh, I've been through this terrible divorce. And she says something about how she has a lot of judgment on her right now. So it's kind of complicated for her to get in another relationship
Mhm.
and just kind of trying to let him down easy because she deals with a lot of male egos being in this business. And even on this tour, she's surrounded by men. I think there is a savviness there to how she, treats the other guys, not endangering herself by letting their egos down easy.
Mhm.
Um, and then the comment about the world of judgment on her, I think, is kind of echoed in the scene in the general store where this like sales clerk woman says that, oh, June's ma and pa, they're good Christians, and that like she's surprised they still speak to her after she got a divorce. And that's an interesting moment, I think, where we get a little bit more from her perspective of having this like really sense of shame almost wash over her in that moment, or at least embarrassment. And rather than like put up a fight necessarily, she just says, I'm sorry I let you down, ma'am.
Yeah, and I feel like, it was a different time then as far as, she's a
Yeah.
country star, her audience is very, white Christian conservative, but I do think the movie gets at something interesting about the parasocial relationships uh
Yeah.
that fans can have with performers, and they're almost not real people to them.
Yeah.
And that idea that you've got to be held to this much higher moral standard, and any kind of slip is immediately met with pushback from the public. And I think we see that on a much grander scale in the era of social media, where even the smallest misstep can, become this huge firestorm on Twitter. And I was thinking a little bit watching it of, how fans act today, how they can turn on somebody just for sometimes even just fairly innocuous things, like suddenly you're, persona non grata, or
Mm-hmm.
just how fans act in general. Thinking about a certain sort of country pop star whose name I will not mention on here lest the fans descend upon you uh, later.
I know
Fans,
what you're saying.
yes, fans can be wild. But
Yeah.
she's very conscious about that, and her character is very savvy about how she's perceived and what she has to be in order to please those fans, and in order to create this kind of public persona that may or may not be real. What we're seeing on stage may not be the real her, and I don't think the movie really tackles that on the level that I think it could, because it's really more focused on Johnny Cash and his journey. But I
Right.
think there is something interesting there.
Yeah, I think so too. And I do think also their duets on stage, you do feel, at least I feel, a very visible charge going on
Yeah.
between them. Like they're definitely putting on a little bit of a show for the audience, but you do kind of believe that there's something more there. Like there
Mhm.
is some fire in their eyes. And of course, they do end up sleeping together, which she seems to regret the morning after when she is reminded of what's back home and she sees him popping pills. And
Mhm.
it's just the regret is right there on her face. And we have this kind of endless cycle over the next few years within the film of him keep trying to win her back, but she is like insisting that he just should back off until he sobers up and gets his act together. And I do think by that point, a lot of the sort of cutesiness and the kind of like easygoing charisma thing becomes something a little more serious, and a feeling that like she's just tired of his bullshit ultimately. And it's a disappointment more than an anger that she's kind of expressing to him. And like a lot of this is pretty basic, like cliche music biopic material,
Yeah.
even by this point in film. But I think to her credit, when I watch the film, I do very much sympathize way more with her than with him.
Well, there is that double standard too, right? Of that, she has to
Mm-hmm.
be so perfect. Then she's being accosted in the store by this little
Yeah.
church lady who's upset that she had gotten a divorce, and he's out there getting drunk and
Yeah.
popping pills and being abusive. And it's interesting that what was essentially a fairly conservative Christian audience was willing to forgive in him, that they were not willing to forgive in her. So she had to
Right.
be perfect, and he didn't have to be, and they loved him for that. And that's interesting as well, I think.
I think what we're coming to the conclusion with here is we need a June Carter biopic
She needs her own
directed by
Priscilla.
Sophia Coppola.
Yes.
Yes. We're on the same page on this. Yes. And we don't hear any Johnny Cash songs in the
No.
film. It's just all from her and her
Yep.
big black hair.
Love it.
Love it.
Somebody call Kaylee Spaney.
Yeah, I mean, she could do it.
She could.
Yeah. So I think sort of in the third act, she does become like the very classic supportive wife of just being kind of like an angelic presence almost to him, like really going above and beyond. And I still think she is putting in good work in those moments. And I think you do wonder, the bad seems to outweigh the good overall with this guy. So that's definitely what I'm thinking, like I said. But I think their chemistry does go a long way to help sort of explain it, even if it's not fully consciously like you want to be like, girl, leave him. But ultimately you kind of see in their eyes a connection that is kind of unspoken, at least for me.
And I think Johnny Cash was fairly upfront about a lot of his foibles in
Oh
real
yeah.
life. He did not try to run from those, to his credit.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's interesting how her story really kind of takes a back seat, even though I don't really feel like they're grappling with the things that they're bringing up, even though they are being very frank about the things that he was going through.
Yeah.
So I would be interested to see what that would look like. But I do think that Joaquin Phoenix is great in this. And
Mm-hmm.
the scenes where they're on stage singing together are electric. I mean, there
Yeah.
is a palpable chemistry there.
Yeah, only other thing I wanted to mention is the classic scene that I've always remembered from this film, which is when he is, again, like constantly trying to propose to her and she keeps saying no. And eventually they're in a dressing room and he keeps calling her baby. And she sasses back, baby, 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 baby.
That was in the
That
trailer,
is,
I'm pretty sure. I feel like
yes.
that was repeated a lot.
Yeah, has always stuck in my mind as like the thing I think about with this performance.
A
She's very
legacy.
good at delivering sass. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. All right, that's pretty much all I got on Reese. So shall we move on to the Oscar race?
Let's do it.
Well, Reese Witherspoon won a whole bunch of critics awards, including from the New York Film Critics, the National Society of Film Critics, Boston, online, like a very, very strong showing. And Felicity Huffman won the National Board of Review. She won the Independent Spirit Award and a few others. Keira Knightley won the New York Film Critics Online. Judi Dench won a Random Critics Award from St. Louis. So sadly, none for Charlize. But then with the major precursors, it was just a total domination for Reese. And for the first time since Julia Roberts, we had a full Best Actress sweep of the major precursors. Critics' Choice, Golden Globe for Comedy or Musical, which it's not really a musical so much as a drama with
Mhm.
music, but that's fine.
It's the
SAG,
Globes.
yeah, I know. And even BAFTA. So yeah, full sweep. Felicity Huffman won the other Golden Globe for drama, which, I mean, like Transamerica has quite a few funny moments, so I feel like they could have frauded that too, for all I
Yeah.
know. But anyway, a weird year. Otherwise, Charlize and Judi were nominated everywhere. Felicity was a constant presence. Keira Knightley, like I said earlier, was a little shakier going into it compared to the other four, but seemed like it definitely coalesced behind this group going into the Oscars. But why do we think Reese not only won this Oscar, but swept award season in the way she did?
Like I said earlier, I think it was one of those right actress, right movie, right time. She was really kind of at the peak of her movie star moment. And it
Yeah.
was one of those things where it was like she's been doing a lot of popular things. She's bringing in the box office. People love her, and now she's got this big role that's very academy friendly, and it's easy to see why they fell for that. Just from a narrative standpoint, it's kind of that young ingenue has her first big serious role like that, and they ate it up.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, this is one of those years where we have, like you said earlier, zero Best Picture representation in Best Actress. Although I imagine if it was a field of 10 or even a sliding scale, like we almost definitely would have had Walk the Line in
Mhm.
Best Picture.
Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, maybe. I think so. I think this was probably the most liked film among the five here by the Academy. And I think this is very much one of those stars aligning moments for Reese where she was a bankable star for a few years now. I think I read she was the highest paid actress in Hollywood at this time. Just a very easily likable presence, now finally getting an Oscar-friendly role and playing a real person, and for a lot of people really nailing it. I think she had a lot in her favor, much like the other sort of A-list Best Actress winners in the early 2000s. She is a star, and she's showing that there's substance there that's more than just a pretty face, and I think that is just a combo that is unbeatable in this era.
I'm not sure what the box office for that year looked like, but I would also just venture a guess that Walk the Line probably was the biggest box office hit of those 5 movies as well.
Oh, yes. Yes, correct. So, I mean, like Transamerica barely made any
Right.
money.
Yeah.
Uh,
Nobody saw it. Or North Country or Mrs. I mean,
North Country really underperformed. Mrs. Henderson Presents, I think, was,
it was probably a solid blue
you know,
hair special.
exactly. Yeah, but not really lighting people up either.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, like Pride and Prejudice did well. It got 4 nominations, but she was probably fifth in nomination voting.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe people thought it was too soon to reward Keira. The nomination was the reward kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Reese was pretty young too, she had definitely proven herself far more than Keira had by this point. So it's just, again, like one of those years where everything is in her favor. The only downside is her lack of screen time compared to the other four, but even still, I think she has the impact that didn't really matter.
Like you said, when she's not on screen, you miss her. I mean, when it's just focusing on Johnny Cash and Joaquin, I mean, not that he's not great in the role, but um, it doesn't have the energy that she brings to it.
Yeah, so that's what it comes down to. Pretty cut and dry, ultimately. We will get into later who we think the runner-up was, but I think it's rather obvious who the runner-up was.
Yes.
Right?
I think it's a fairly distant second, but yes,
Yes,
I
I think so too.
it was never going to be anybody but Reese this year.
Yeah,
But yeah,
and they all knew it. Yeah, we'll get into it later. Shall we get into these questions?
let's do it.
Okay. Starting with Greg Adams. Is this the most forgotten lineup of the century?
Probably. It's hard to kind of gauge that metric, but
Yeah.
I also feel like it's probably hard to find anybody who's still carrying the torch for Mrs. Henderson Presents or North Country. So,
Yeah. True. Yeah. This is very forgotten. I mean, I think, yeah, like you said, Judi and Charlize's nominations are not remembered. But I do sort of think that like 2003 feels to me even more forgotten in the general zeitgeist, where like, yes, we have Charlize, yes, we have Diane Keaton. I don't know if there's a lot of like Samantha Morton, Naomi Watts, even Keisha Castle Hughes. I guess it depends on who we ask in terms of like forgotten, like general public. Yeah, maybe not so much, but I think it is between those two, 2003 and 2005.
Yeah.
The Possibility of Wood said, "This is a good year for actresses. How did we end up here? How did this happen?"
Was it a good year for actresses?
Yeah, that's what I would. Yeah, that's what I would counter.
I don't know if I would categorize it that way. As I was preparing for this, I dug back through my watch list for that year, looked at my top 10 list, looked at the everything that I saw and what was in the hunt for the Oscars that year, and just trying to imagine what else could have made it in here. And there aren't a lot of really plausible alternatives to what we've got. It felt like they were already kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, and I don't know if it just speaks to how male-centric the films were this year. I mean, there are other performances that year that I loved that I would have certainly swapped out, but overall, not really a strong year for stories about women.
Yeah, very dude-heavy Best Picture lineup.
Mm-hmm.
0 female leads in any of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Celluloid Siren, is this the worst lineup in this category ever? I would say not ever.
Yeah, that's a stretch. We've got almost 100 years to choose from for that one. But you've probably seen more of them at this point than I have in this journey, so you can probably speak more to that.
Yeah, I would say 1949. Olivia de Havilland and the Heiress, all-timer. Everyone else, nothing going on there. Nothing. So At least we have one or two here that I do enjoy. It feels like the most underwhelming, I suppose. Like, I can feel the lack of passion
Yeah,
from the Academy
yeah.
with these nominees. All right, Jeremy Kaplan, just kind of continuing this. Some people call this a weak lineup, but is that about the actual performances or more about the scarcity of lead female roles in film in general this year?
Yes.
Yes.
To
Yeah,
both.
I think it's both, yeah. But more about the scarcity of roles.
Yeah.
Because I at least think most of these performances are good. I just think, again, like some of them would definitely not have made it in a stronger year.
No, yeah, I really
Yeah.
can't see a lot of them making it in any other year, really. Maybe
Yeah.
Reese, but and it's not that they're bad performances. I would argue Felicity Huffman's was. But otherwise, I think they're very middle of the road, fine, serviceable work, but nothing really stand
Mm-hmm.
out about them.
Yeah. This is an interesting one from Christoph. Does Reese Witherspoon win in any other year of the 2000s, or did she just luck out with a year in which the only clear alternative to her was a performance in a film many Academy voters were even less interested in watching than Brokeback Mountain?
You know, that's it's hard to make that hypothetical because every year seems so perfectly self-contained as far as
Yeah,
what the narrative is for that year and how
right.
somebody from another year might fit into that. I mean, you know, it really depends on so many other factors. Could could she have beaten Julianne Moore in Still Alice? Maybe, but Julianne Moore had the narrative of Overdue. You know, I possibly, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if this is just the 2000s, I don't think she beats Julia. I don't think she beats Halle Berry. I don't think she beats Nicole Kidman. I don't think she beats Charlize Theron.
No.
Maybe Hilary Swank. I don't know. Maybe it would have been a little closer for Million Dollar Baby. Definitely not Helen Mirren. Definitely not Marion Cotillard. Probably not Kate Winslet. 2009 over Sandra Bullock. Who knows?
Yeah, she might could have won that. But that was another one of those movie star has a big role kind of narratives.
Right.
And
So it would have been competing
yeah.
for the same narrative. Yeah. Christoph said if Reese Witherspoon had been campaigned in supporting, what would have happened in both categories? So what would have happened in supporting? I assume Reese would have just won supporting if she's
Right.
campaigned
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I mean, Rachel Weisz in The Constant Gardener was another one of those sweeps
Yeah.
that just and that's another one of those movies that nobody talks about today. And I remember loving it at the time, but I couldn't tell you what it was about today. Um,
Yes.
but you know, that
The
was one of the
discourse on The Constant Gardener is not constant.
yes. So it's you know, that was those were two juggernauts, right? So I mean they both basically
Right.
won everything on the way to Oscar night. So it's you put the two together, who comes out on top? Probably Reese Witherspoon because she's a bigger name than
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Weisz was, but you know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And if she's not in lead, then I'm guessing Zhang Zi is nominated for Memoirs of a Geisha. I don't think she wins, but
No.
I'm guessing the person who we will say is the runner-up would win, which
Yes.
would have been interesting. Put a pin in that. Diego A. Cabrera said, rank Reese's performance among fellow country best actress contenders, Sissy Spacek for Coal Miner's Daughter and Jessica Lange for Sweet Dreams.
Well, I haven't seen Sweet Dreams, so can't say anything about that. But I you know, Sissy Spacek's got to be number one. I mean, that's Coal Miner's Daughter is
Yeah,
iconic, and so is she. So
she is the blueprint
yes,
of the music biopic. So easily number one, and then Reese, and then Jessica Lange. Sorry. She is fine. She doesn't exactly lip sync in a way that is entirely convincing to Patsy Cline. So that's why I would rank her slightly below Reese. All due respect. Marcel said, is this the most recent example of what if there was a wife win since Louise Reiner? Wow, a throwback.
yeah, that goes back a ways.
Yep.
I mean, I feel like Oscar history is littered with the wife roles. And
Yes. If only
nothing's
we had crowned the real wife.
right.
The
Yeah.
wife. Anyway.
uh, so yeah, I can't think of another particular standout, but it is a very long-suffering wife kind of performance.
Yeah. Grace Kelly in The Country Girl, I think, is another one like that. Sort of Katharine Hepburn and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, sort
Mm.
of. After this, I think the one closest to like a Reese Witherspoon kind of thing would be, honestly, like Jennifer Lawrence in Silver Linings Playbook.
Sort of.
Yeah. Andy Bayless said Reese Witherspoon only has 2 nominations. Which other performances would you elect to nominate or win? Very clever, Andy. Election for sure.
Yes. Yeah, that's the only one that I think that would really get close for me.
Yeah. It would have been nice to have a Legally Blonde nomination. Not that it ever would have happened, but 2001 is tough. So
Yeah, that's a
I don't
hard
think she'd
lineup
make
to
my
break
lineup.
into, but I mean that
Yeah.
could have been a Bridget Jones's Diary sort of situation.
Cyan Kelly said, do you ever think Reese will get another nomination after Wild, or is she fully focused on TV?
I mean, never say never. I mean, she's still a powerhouse.
Yeah.
But I do think she is focused more on her media empire right now. But I definitely could see her Renee Zellwegering herself into a future Oscar race out
Mm,
of the blue.
wow. That's a good bet. Yeah. I will be thinking of you if that ever happens. Yeah, definitely seems like TV is her focus now. I mean, she was in Your Place or Mine last year, which was her first live action role in like 5 years when she was in A Wrinkle in Time. So like it's
Yeah.
not her priority at this point. So might be a little while.
She would have a comeback narrative though.
She would. Okay, Christoph said, is this the most We Love You, Dame Judi nomination, or is it one of her supporting nominations, such as Chocolat or Belfast?
I would say Chocolat has less to do with Judy and more to do with Harvey Weinstein. But
Yeah.
yeah, I uh, but Belfast might be uh a more just random. I feel like they filled her name in there because they couldn't think of anybody else.
Yeah.
Um, and
They
she
couldn't think
also
of her co-star in the
right
movie, Katrina Balfe.
right like everybody thought it was going to be her and then it was Dame Judy. I really think that
Yep.
that was almost like a default sort of yeah, well, I remember her name. Can't spell Katarina
Yeah.
Balfe, so here we go.
That may have been what happened. Yeah, I think that's Belfast, honestly, you know. And I think there was also a lot of commentary at this time that like Judy is becoming like the new Meryl. Like if she has a movie this year, she's gonna get that nomination. So I think of her lead nominations, this is probably the most like
Yes.
name check kind of
Mhm.
feeling. Miles McHale said, Judy is on autopilot here. Would a Brenda Blethyn Mrs. Henderson Presents have livened things up? Or maybe a Julie Christie?
Those would have been interesting. I mean, I feel like Brenda Blethyn is kind of doing a little bit of that in
Yeah.
Pride and
Pride and
Prejudice.
Prejudice. Yeah.
But that
Mm-hmm.
would have been interesting to see them to see her in that Mrs. Henderson role.
Yeah. I like the idea of a Julie Christie. I think, you know, playing up a little more fabulousness. Julie
Hmm.
Christie, I would like to see. Josh said, will we ever see a nomination like Judi Dench in Mrs. Henderson Presents again? With the Academy getting more and more global, there seems to be less room for quaint British films like this to get in anymore.
I definitely think that kind of movie is not really something you see much anymore. I definitely have a sort of nostalgia for those kinds of movies. I think the closest thing we've come to recently is Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. I
Yes.
Leslie Manville was delightful in that. But back
Mm-hmm.
then you've got Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont and Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day, and um, you
Whenever there's a miss or a misses,
yes,
it's a good bet.
that was a thing back then. You would
Yeah.
and a lot of these movies are also directed by Stephen Frears, so
Yep.
he had the market cornered back then. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, never say never, but I feel like that movie is if not extinct, a very endangered species.
Yeah. I think even like I don't remember what year it was, but a few years ago, like Judy was kind of contending herself for like Victoria and Abdul,
Hmm.
but that didn't happen at the Oscars. So I think, yeah, it's coming a little out of style.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been replaced, that kind of movie, by like the the book club cinema
Yes. Yes.
for older actresses, for better or for worse. Okay. PDO said, if Felicity had won instead of Reese, would that win be considered problematic today?
Yes. I do
I think
not.
I already knew your answer to that.
I I I think Reese's win has aged better than Felicity would have. I do not think it would have aged well.
Yeah. And I think also, even outside of some of those circumstances, I think it's wasn't as well received as, like, or hasn't been all these years later as well received as Hilary Swank and Boys Don't Cry, for example.
Right.
But it is interesting, I think, just based on some of the comments I got when I tweeted about watching Transamerica. This is a very divisive performance. And when I say divisive, I mean there are people who still really think she should have won and advocate that she deserved it. So I think she still would have had her fans that thought, she deserved it, but also plenty of criticism too.
I definitely think Reese is more widely loved, and that Walk the Line is a movie that people remember and still watch today. I know,
And have seen.
yes. Going out when I was some of the nominees I already had copies of, but Walk the Line was one that I did not. So I went to my local used bookstore to see what I could pick up, and there were many copies of Walk the Line in the bargain bin there. So it's a movie people buy and later discard, but it's definitely more prevalent. I think it's one of those that you for people who have 5 movies on the shelf, one of them might be Walk the Line.
Yeah. AKA my parents.
Yes.
Moving on. Christoph said, does Felicity Huffman get this nomination without Desperate Housewives?
Maybe, but like you said, I mean, she was working on this beforehand, and that definitely bumped up her profile. But I'm not sure how much of an effect Desperate Housewives had on the Oscar campaign for Transamerica.
I think she still would have had a shot just because it is so transformative and very baity, right. But I think Desperate Housewives gave her a huge boost in visibility just as a person. So I think she still could get in, but part of me thinks she maybe wouldn't have contended as strongly for like the win as she did without Desperate Housewives. I'll say that. We got quite a few Desperate Housewives related questions here. Richard Thompson said, how much did Felicity's work on Desperate Housewives hinder or help her toward getting close to a win here? Again, I think helped because her profile was boosted so much. At the same time, was there still a little bit of bias of feeling like, oh, she's a TV star, because there was that divide for a while.
There may have been some of that, but I think that Reese was just so undeniable that year that it really didn't move the needle in a way that that made much of a difference.
Patrick Rivers said, Felicity Huffman was outstanding as Lynette, one of the many residents of Wisteria Lane on Desperate Housewives. Which of these 5 characters whose actresses were nominated for the Oscar this year do you think would feel at home on Wisteria Lane?
As I have not seen it, I can only imagine, but let's throw Mrs. Henderson in there just to see what happens.
That was my instinct too. Yeah, I think she would have a ball just like meddling in all these people's lives.
Yeah.
Maybe even some orchestrating some of the drama herself. Ironically, probably not Brie, even though we have a Brie on Desperate Housewives. I don't think she would thrive in that community. No. She would probably be ostracized, unfortunately. June Carter, she's got the whole no nonsense thing, and she is a famous wife, so that's kind of part of it. But I wouldn't consider her like a housewife necessarily.
No.
Elizabeth Bennet, she'd fit in all right, but can't really picture her in that world. Josie from North Country, I'm going to say a hard no.
No.
I think she cracks under the pressure of living on Wisteria Lane. That would be tough. So anyway, Jimmy said, recast Huffman's Desperate Housewives co-stars Marcia Cross, Terry Hatcher, Eva Longoria, and Nicolette Sheridan in the roles of her fellow nominees?
That one's all you, boo.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, I'm going to go Nicolette Sheridan in North Country. Marcia Cross. I mean, like, none of these work for Mrs. Henderson Presents. Like, that just wouldn't make sense, but we'll put her in Mrs. Henderson Presents. This isn't perfect, but based on her skill set, I think like Eva Longoria makes sense in a walk the line type of role. Maybe not necessarily playing June Carter, but similar. I don't think anyone would even be good in Pride and Prejudice, but I guess we're putting Terry Hatcher for that. Anyway, that's the Desperate Housewives corner. Moving on to Ben Roberts. If the Academy had been more positive towards LGBTQ plus stories at this time and Brokeback Mountain had won Best Picture, do you think Huffman would have won for Transamerica?
No. Again, I just think that Witherspoon was just so undeniable that I don't think that Huffman being a trans story is what kept her from winning necessarily. I think it was just too overwhelming for Reese.
Yeah.
But a gay romance winning Best Picture and someone playing a trans character winning in Best Actress in 2005 would have probably been too much. That would have been a queer singularity.
Yes. Yeah, I think it would have played out the same way, honestly, if Brokeback had won.
Yeah.
Nothing would change.
Right.
Let's see. Joey Gentili said Felicity Huffman was a woman robbed, and it's been said that the Academy didn't reward her due to its bias with TV actors transitioning to the big screen at that time. Would she win today with the TV/movie crossovers we see now?
In the same role? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, like, considering how times have changed, and even I think Felicity herself has said she wouldn't play this character today, I highly doubt it. I think there probably would have been a lot of backlash, similar to like a Scarlett Johansson, I think, when she had that film where she was going to play a trans person, and that never got made.
Yeah, I don't think Frances Fisher could have even saved her if she had done that today.
Oof. Not Frances Fisher. Yeah, but like if we're just taking that out of it and saying like, yes, like an actress like Felicity Huffman, who primarily worked in TV, probably wouldn't have had as much of a problem winning an Oscar now compared to then. Richard Thompson said Duncan Tucker chose Felicity because he wanted to focus on where Brie was going rather than where she'd been. Typically, men would play this part, so the casting was pretty revolutionary at the time. Time seems to have dulled that point. Is this a case of you had to be there?
That's a hard one to answer.
Yeah.
I think for me anyway, I think that the issue with the movie is deeper than who is playing the role. And I think there are actually better trans stories that would come along later where it was a cis man playing the role, like Transparent. That I actually think are better as at portraying a trans story than Transamerica is. So yeah, I don't necessarily think that maybe it is a you had to be there thing, and there is something to be said about focusing on where she's going than where she's been. That is somewhat a progressive thought for the time, but I think the movie itself then kind of undercuts a lot of that.
Yeah, it is very complicated, I think. And I think if you look back, like, she was definitely very praised for this performance and seen as very bold and daring and all those buzzwords that people like to say about performances like this and raw and all this stuff. But yeah, it's just, even if it's 19 years later, it still kind of does feel like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
At the same time. All right, well, this will be the interesting question here. Joey Gentili said, I'm a firm advocate that it's the right actor for the right part, but absolutely audition / consider everyone. You don't need to be gay to play gay, trans to play trans, etc. Huffman was the absolute correct choice here. With that said, what are your thoughts on the PC idea of must be to play thought process? And if it was that important, then name which trans actress who was a name could have starred and gotten the film funded based on her name, which would have been needed / business side of things. It's kind of a long one. Yeah.
That feels like a very leading question that's kind of
Yeah.
anticipating an answer. But again, my issue with the performance isn't necessarily that she's a cisgender woman. I think it's just I find the performance itself artificial and somewhat condescending. But I agree to some extent that we may have overplayed our hand as far as being very specific about complaining about straight people playing gay roles, because when you start questioning someone's gender or sexuality, you have a situation like where you had the Heartbreakers cast, where you forced actors out of the closet who were queer, but they were not ready to come out as queer. But people were upset because they were like, oh, well, there's a straight person playing this role. Well, they weren't straight, but now you forced them out of the closet, and you've caused more harm in that than had been previously done. So I would agree that, I think it's interesting when people talk about, well, cast the best person for the role, don't cast based on sexuality or gender. I think people tend to only pull out that argument in support of someone who is not of a marginalized community getting a role. I don't necessarily think there is somebody that checks all those boxes in 2005 who is trans that could have done all those things in the question. But I would have liked to see somebody like Alexandra Billings play a role like that. I think that could be very interesting. But obviously she was just getting her start then and did not have the kind of name to get that film made. But I at the end of the day, it honestly doesn't really matter to me whether the movie gets made or not, because I don't think it's that interesting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is a loaded topic, and I get the sentiment of the question. I think, generally speaking, yes, acting is acting, but it is more of an issue of the broad sense, just because, like, trans actors are offered so little compared to cis actors, and even with stories that have a trans lead, we have cis actors taking them, and as far as like the bankability factor, I think it's kind of like a snake eating its own tail type situation, where like if you don't give these kinds of opportunities to trans actors, then no trans actors are going to be considered bankable, and then trans actors aren't cast because there's no track record and they're untested and therefore seen as not bankable. So it's just like this perpetuating cycle that I think needs to be broken at a certain point,
And I feel like a movie like Transamerica is a good jumping off point for an unknown, untested trans actress. It was not a huge hit. I don't think people were swarming in to see Felicity Huffman. It got awards traction, it got attention, maybe because of her stature, but it's also not like she was a huge movie star either. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened with a trans actress. I don't know if it would have gotten the same attention, but it may have aged better. So
Matt Stillman said, should Transamerica have won Best Original Song?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, my favorite part of the film. I love that song. All due respect to It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp, but I think very unique winner.
It was the highlight of that Oscar ceremony too. Dolly came out there and just electrified that room, and I still remember
she took him to church.
She did. She made people stand up. Jack Nicholson stood up, and he's on the front row in his sunglasses and he's clapping along. He's like, holy, somebody just came out here and shook this place up. He looked kind of shell-shocked, but he was like, all right, I'm gonna go with it. I'm at a Dolly concert now. Yeah, it was and there were only 3 nominees that year, and there was the crash dirge. That was, it's
a good word for it. Yes.
Give it to Dolly. Come on, man.
We could have had Academy Award winner Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
and the world would have been a better place. Patrick Rivers said Felicity Huffman won the Emmy for Best Leading Actress in a Comedy Series in 2005. What other winners of that Emmy category would you like to see get an Oscar-worthy role and receive their first Oscar nomination?
Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Yes, that is one of the big ones. I mean, Jean Smart,
Yeah.
Catherine O'Hara, certainly. We also, I mean, worth noting, we did just get one with America Ferrera, Emmy winner for Ugly Betty, getting her first Oscar nomination this past year.
True. Yeah, I definitely think Jean Smart would be a good one. And I still I don't know if you talked about this in that episode, but she had played Eileen Wuornos
We
prior
did
to,
not,
prior
but
to I don't know if it was a TV movie, but I remember at the time uh an interview with her where she was kind of upset that she had not been offered Monster. Like she kind of felt Eileen Wuornos was
oh,
her role. So that's an interesting alternative history of Jean Smart playing Eileen Wuornos in Monster. What would that have
damn,
looked like?
damn, wow. This is a. I mean, you don't have to answer this. I just think it's one of the funniest questions I've ever gotten. Christoph said, which other Best Actress nominee should be sent to jail for 2 weeks and why?
Of all time or just this year?
Apparently, yeah. Any other Best Actress nominee? Who are you sending to jail?
Oh, I oof. I I don't know. I'm a prison abolitionist, so let's not
Yeah,
send any of them to jail.
I agree. I don't think any. I may be eating my words after I say this, but I don't know if anyone's ever done anything that criminal to be worthy of that. Anyway, Ben Roberts said, with the benefit of hindsight, should we have just given Keira this Oscar and waited for Wild for Reese?
I think they should have given Keira this Oscar, but I don't think they should have given Reese the Oscar for one. So there's
So you would
that.
have deprived her both times.
Yes.
Okay. Poor Reese. Yeah, she'll be fine. Yeah, I wouldn't have minded that alternate history. I do really like her in Wild. Yeah, probably wouldn't be my winner either, but I do think she's better in Wild than Walk the Line, so I guess that would be more acceptable. Glorfindel of Gondolin said Keira Knightley had excellent credentials this year. She appeared in hugely successful blockbusters and was critically acclaimed. Pride and Prejudice is also a literary work that men will actually read, too, unlike Little Women. This seemed to be her moment. Why didn't it work out?
As my recollection is that Pride and Prejudice was kind of a late breaking presence in the award
Yeah.
race. I don't think I saw it until January that year. I could be misremembering, but I think it was one of the later things to come along.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she was extremely lucky to be nominated considering how the race had shaped up until that point. I think Zhang Ziyi was pretty well accepted as being that fifth slot, and then Kira kind of snuck up and got it at the last minute. Had Pride and Prejudice come out earlier, would it have been different? I don't know. I still think that Kira was too new on the scene compared to Reese. That's one of those like, we'll welcome you to the dance, but we're not going to award you just yet. I think Reese had been there a little longer and probably not didn't feel overdue, but it felt like her moment.
Yeah, you pretty much covered it. I don't have anything to add there. Richard Thompson said Keira Knightley's performance seems to have really lasted in the public psyche, so why no traction? And also, why isn't she more of an Oscar mainstay? Well, again, we already kind of talked about the first part, but why isn't she more of an Oscar mainstay? She's in all these prestigious films, or she was, at least in the late 2000s to early 2010s.
It is interesting. I was looking at her filmography earlier just to kind of refresh myself of what's there. And, like I said when we were talking about her performance, it does just feel like a Star is Born performance. It feels like an actress announcing who she is as a performer and really staking her claim. And then it doesn't really translate into this long-lived leading lady career. I mean, she is in other films and she completes Pirates of the Caribbean, but doesn't. What was that? Colette. She was in Colette.
Yeah.
And some of these movies just don't really take off. She's in Anna Karenina again, which I think was just maybe too conceptually out there for the Academy. Um,
Yeah.
Never Let Me Go is one of those like this had Oscar buzz kind of things that
Hmm.
just don't take off. I don't know. None of the Duchess, none of these movies really catch on. Like I think they're very like middle of the road kind of art house movies that have just been fine. There's nothing really great
Yeah.
there. I think
Yeah.
the closest she probably came was The Imitation Game.
Yeah. I think she's just one of those actresses who's well liked, but doesn't maybe inspire the kind of passion that's needed to really, like, really win people over on like a widespread level.
Yeah.
Like, she definitely has her fans, but I don't know. Maybe she just needs to do something truly off the wall, different.
And that's the thing
Like,
with some of these
Poor
movies.
Things level of like
Right.
wild, you know?
Yeah. Because I think a lot of these movies are those kind of like, I feel like The Duchess and Anna Karenina and even Atonement are very much kind of in that
Yeah.
Pride and Prejudice sort of vein. And so people
Hmm.
feel like they've kind of seen these performances before, and she hasn't really broken out of that.
Sean Kelly and Ben Roberts want to know if we would have nominated Keira Knightley for any other leading performances. I might for Atonement.
That's what I was thinking.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Not that I would feel like super passionate about that, but I do just really like her, and she has the incredible green dress.
The
Not that
green
that has
dress.
anything to do with her performance, but you know.
Give her an Oscar for the green dress.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think Atonement would be the only one that I would really think about as far as like a best actress kind of role.
yeah. Joey Gentile said North Country is a super important film, but seems to be lost in memory to most. Had Theron not just won, do you think she would have actually stood a chance to win this year?
Probably not.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like it does feel like a follow-up kind of nomination, but it doesn't feel it's not Monster level. Monster was one of those undeniable ones.
Yeah,
But North Country was just it didn't make an impact at the box office. It didn't make an impact at in the Oscar race. I don't think it's beating Reese regardless.
yeah, yeah. Not enough passion.
I think at most
Um,
she's third place here.
Miles McHale said, "Why are Charlize's nominations other than Monster for such truly forgettable Oscar bait?"
That's a good question. Monster is an out of the box kind of thing because I mean that movie it's rough and nasty and does not feel
Hmm.
like an Oscar-y kind of movie, but it's one of those things that's just so undeniable that you can't ignore it. And
Right.
she's had I loved her in Tully.
Ugh, yes.
I think there are other things like that. But then they nominate her for Bombshell of all things. So yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think she's had as good of a role as Monster again.
I
But
think Young Adult
yeah,
is close to that. I would have loved a nomination there. I mean, even Mad Max Fury Road would have been kind of fun.
yeah,
Just see a performance like that nominated. But I think the Academy just finds it easier to appreciate, roles that they're more comfortable with
right.
rewarding, seeing her in those kinds of things, even if her more interesting work is outside of that. Okay, Adam said rank the performances of the actresses playing labor/consumer rights activists. Norma Ray, Silkwood, Aaron Brockovich, North Country.
Okay, well, I'm going to need to hand in my Oscar Watcher credentials because I have not seen Norma Ray. I know.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
so, but I have seen the other ones.
Okay.
So I am going to rank it probably in release order. Meryl Streep and then Julia Roberts uh and then Charlize.
Okay. I would put Julia Roberts first, personally. I think she's just undeniable there. And then Sally Field, and then Meryl Streep, and then towards the bottom, Charlize Theron, all due respect. The other three are just really top tier stuff. Steve, no, not that Steve, the other one, said this lineup sucks, just like the lineup of 1994, where Jessica Lange won, sucks. If you were given the 10 women of this lineup and the 1994 lineup and told to make a list of 5 nominees, who makes it?
Oh Lord, I've got to look up who was nominated in '94 real fast.
Well, I can remind you and the audience who we had. Jessica Lange, of course, in Blue Sky was the winner. Jodie Foster in Nell. Miranda Richardson in Tom and Viv. Winona Ryder in Little Women. And Susan Sarandon in The Client.
So I have not seen Blue Sky or Tom and Viv, but I have seen Nell, Little Women, and The Client.
Okay.
So if we're combining these and doing 5, I'm going to put Keira Knightley and Winona Ryder. That's God, yeah, that's tough.
Well, I would agree with that. Those two are the locks. Both the literary girlies are the locks. Keira Knightley and Winona Ryder. I would honestly, as wild as this may be to people, I would keep Jessica Lange, because that is a wild commitment of a performance. And I would keep Reese Witherspoon too. I think she is like a solid 4th or 5th in whatever lineup this is, but
yeah,
better than the alternatives. The 5th would be, I have no idea, Miranda Richardson.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm not left with a lot of great stuff here.
No.
All right. Eric Anderson said, take each of the nominees and put them into one of the other nominated roles in this category. I don't know if you saw this question, but
but why though?
Just for fun.
Okay, let's go with me on this. Let's Judi Dench as June Carter Cash, just for my own amusement.
Wow.
Like older June
stage?
Carter, you know,
yes.
We're fast forwarding in Johnny Cash's life a little bit.
Gotcha. So. Walk the line too.
Yes. Charlize Theron in Transamerica.
Yep.
Reese Witherspoon in North Country. And so that leaves Keira Knightley and Mrs. Henderson Presents, I guess.
Yeah, when she's like 60, she can do that. Yeah. Again, this is tricky because of the Judi Dench factor and the Mrs. Henderson Presents factor, but I will agree with you. Charlize Theron in Transamerica. I would do Felicity Huffman in North Country. I think that could work. Keira Knightley, I put in Walk the Line, doing a different accent. Reese Witherspoon in a role that is like similar to Mrs. Henderson Presents, but not exactly that. Like, she could have fun with that kind of thing. And I'll say a younger Judi Dench in Pride and Prejudice.
I can see that.
More recasting stuff here from, well, Gordon wants us to recast these roles with actresses who have never been nominated for acting. And Eric Anderson asked the same question, but said it had to be recasting for 2024. So current, who would play these roles now kind of thing.
Oh, Lord.
But to never be nominated for Oscars.
They've never been nominated for Oscars.
Yeah. I had to put in a lot of work for this. So
let's hear what you've got, and then I will nod along sagely.
I feel pretty good about this, not gonna lie. I'm liking what I found here. I'm gonna put, for Pride and Prejudice, Daisy Edgar Jones.
Okay.
For North Country, I went with Jodie Comer.
I like that.
For Walk the Line, I did Elizabeth Olsen.
Ooh. Yeah, okay, I like that.
She has a resemblance, I think, that could work.
Yeah.
Transamerica, I said Trace Lysette, who is, by the way, the same age as Felicity Huffman was in 2005. I wanted to check that. And Mrs. Henderson Presents Miriam Margolyes.
Yes! I love that.
Thank you.
Somebody needs to nominate her for an Oscar. I think she is over it and no longer cares, which I love for her. But she's great. We love Miriam Margolyes.
Yep. All right. I don't know if you had any other alternate suggestions there.
I could
Nice.
not top that.
Okay. Well, Alicia said 2005 also saw the release of Batman Begins. Which Batman villains would you cast these actresses as?
We're we're doing a lot of fantasy recasting.
Yes,
Um,
fan fiction. Yep. There's not a
Reese
lot of female Batman
Witherspoon.
villains, so
There's
this is a little
not.
tough. But,
There's only
you know,
three that I can think of, but here
yeah.
we go. Reese Witherspoon as Harley Quinn,
Mm-hmm.
Keira Knightley as Catwoman,
Mm-hmm.
and Charlize Theron as Poison Ivy.
I had that exact combination. Not
Yeah.
even kidding. Yeah. And from there, I'm like, I don't
That's
even
all. Yeah.
know.
I oh.
Talia al Ghul is another
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Felicity Huffman can play
Felicity
Talia.
Huffman, right? I could not find a spot for Judi Dench.
Let's make her the
Uh,
Joker. Because why not?
I would love to hear Judi Dench's Joker laugh. That would be chilling. Or she could be Alfred.
There you go.
Or Martha Wayne. I don't know. Let's see. Chels said obligatory survivor questions. Who wins? Who dominates challenges? Best social game, best strategy? Who would you want on your tribe or to take on reward wins? Who goes on to appear on every other reality franchise? Are you a Survivor fan?
I've never really watched it. I watched it back in the day when it was brand new, so that was
Okay.
a long time ago.
So around this era, like
Yes,
2005.
yeah.
Got it.
Uh,
Okay.
but I am vaguely familiar with the concept. So,
Okay.
I think Charlize Theron in North Country is going to be a tough player.
Yeah.
Definitely
She's
somebody
been
I
working
want.
in those mines.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's got those challenges, especially over this group. No offense. I don't think this is like a picture of physical strength.
No, definitely not Bree or Mrs.
No.
Henderson. Maybe June
No.
Cash.
Sure. June. Yeah, she's resilient. I would like to align with June. I think she
Yes.
would be a good ally. I think Elizabeth Bennet would be a very good social player in a
Mhm.
way that I would be like, oh, I have to get rid of her. She's too dangerous. So that's what I would say. But yeah, I think June would maybe win from this group. She's likable, she's feisty, she's certainly loyal, which I think
Mhm.
helps. Who would go on to appear on other reality shows? Also June.
Yeah.
You know, she's got the
She's
personality. Or Mrs. Henderson. I think she'd be fun.
yeah, she
Showing up on the
definitely has
Traitors.
Drag Race All Stars
There we
vibes.
go. Okay. Declan Cashin said this lineup is a stinker. Would any of these make your personal top 5 for the year? What are your personal alt nominees for the year? And then M Jeeper also wants us to just fully replace all of them with 5 other performances.
I don't know if I can fully replace the lineup.
Yeah, it's
But
tough.
looking at that year, the one that I so desperately wanted to be nominated and it never took off and I never understood it was Naomi Watts in King Kong. I think she is incredible in that movie. I
Mm-hmm.
love Peter Jackson's take on it. Um, and the fact that she is acting alongside a gorilla that is not there is amazing. I
Yeah,
think she's great in that movie. I would have loved to have seen her nominated for that.
that would have been really fun to talk about.
Yes. Fernanda Montenegro in The House of Sand um,
Mm.
is another one that I love a lot from that year. Who have you got?
Joan Allen in The Upside of Anger is a big one, which I just finally watched just as a bit of extra credit this past week because a lot of people praised that performance and she lives up to the hype. I wish that had done better. I guess Maria Bello in A History of Violence, I'm just going to fraud into lead, even though she's kind of supporting. But there was so
Yeah.
much category confusion for her that year that just like, I'll put her there. I do Laura Linney in The Squid and the Whale.
Yes. Yes.
And I would actually agree, like, looking at my options, I think Naomi Watts in King Kong would make my alternate lineup too. So that's 4, but
Boyanka Kilcher in The New World would be another one.
which I have not seen. And I need to. I know that.
Yes.
Yeah, like I wish I could slot in like a Zhang Zi for Memoirs of a Geisha, but I don't remember that performance too strongly, and there is problems there.
Yeah, and that movie is one of those. I mean, it's beautiful to look at, but it's just such a blah of a movie. Otherwise, I don't think that.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than those, I think those are some good picks. But it is a fairly weak year
Hmm.
for actressing, unfortunately.
Yeah. Amar said if Rachel Weisz gets lead here, who would have been bumped out?
Keira
Keira
Knightley.
Knightley, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Diego A. Cabrera, Hi Girls, Hi Louise, Reese Jennings, Look Home, and Ben Roberts all want to know why Zhang Ziyi was not nominated, despite getting all the precursor love.
It is kind of surprising given the precursor love that she falls out. I think there's a combination of Pride and Prejudice being kind of a late breaking contender. Um, and Shang Zi was already kind of the fifth place placeholder there.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody else to bump out. Um, and it's just not a movie that people loved. I mean, it wins Oscars. It's all below the line, and I think all of its nominations are below the nine nominations, right? And
Yeah.
it's
Mm-hmm.
so it's like they kind of respected its craft, but they didn't love the movie itself.
Yeah. That's what it was. And you know what? I do think there may have been some unconscious bias coming into play with, I mean, like Asian actresses have traditionally really struggled to get into this
Mm-hmm.
category, you
Yeah,
know? So the snub is a little glaring in that respect, but I, without a doubt, she was sixth place. So,
yeah.
how dare you said this was a great opportunity for the Academy to welcome Gwyneth Paltrow back for proof. What happened?
Nobody saw it. It's just it's fine, but it's very stagey. I mean, it's very much a filmed play. I feel like I don't it never really garnered any passion that year.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, so I can't really say.
I saw it when it was new. I mean, that was almost 20 years ago, so that's it's
Yeah,
hard to really speak for it now. Just my reaction as a 19-year-old at the time was that there's really uh not
yeah,
much going on there. It would probably make a great episode of This Had Oscar Buzz, but it just never took
yeah.
off.
Mark Brinkerhoff said this should have been the year Joan Allen not only was nominated again, but actually won an Oscar. Why was the Academy so quick to move on and overlook her widely acclaimed star turn in The Upside of Anger?
So I will admit I have not actually seen The Upside of Anger. My only familiarity with it is strangely enough Alexander Desplat's score, which I like a lot, but too early. I think it was released in the summer, wasn't it? It
It
was
was released in March,
Oh
actually,
wow.
so
So the
yeah,
spring.
even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was they just forgot about it.
yeah. I think having watched it now, the tone of it, I think, is maybe not aligning with Oscar taste, I suppose. Like it's kind of too light to really like hit home, but also like a
Mm,
little too dark at the same time. Like I think it's just wasn't really Academy fair necessarily, but her performance within that is phenomenal. So, yeah, highly recommend it. Right now it's on Max
okay.
streaming, so just going to throw that out there for people. And Robert McFarlane and Andrew Carden both want to know, is it because of the early release date that Joan Allen did not get nominated? Again, maybe. And with a stronger campaign, like I don't know if she was really, you know, getting those ads in the papers necessarily, but yeah, would have been nice to have been able to talk about her. Maybe a future episode of A Woman Robbed, throwing that out there for the patrons to maybe do that for me. Okay. J.K. Wilsor said if she wasn't being campaigned for supporting, should Taraji P. Henson have been nominated here for Hustle and Flow?
Uh I don't remember a lot about that performance, to be quite honest. I know I've seen Hustle and Flow, but
Yeah, probably
I'm
not.
yeah.
Okay. Last question here from Joey Gentili. One more recasting. Recast these 2000s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. So Carey Mulligan, Anne Hathaway, Diane Lane, Virginia Madsen.
Virginia Madsen in North Country
I had that too.
and Anne Hathaway in Walk the Line.
Mm-hmm.
Carey Mulligan in Pride and Prejudice. She's already in
Mm-hmm.
it. Let's just bump her up.
Yep.
Um,
A Star is Born for her
yeah,
there.
there you go.
Yeah.
Um, Karen Black and Mrs. Henderson. Who are we missing?
Mm-hmm. Diane Lane in Transamerica.
Diane Lane in Transamerica. There we go.
Bingo. That is exactly my combination. Not even kidding. Just 5 for 5. I think that makes the most sense.
We love to
Yep.
see it.
All right. Well, let's move on to our final segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Mattie, it's time to give me your verdict here. Who was the runner-up to Reese?
Felicity Huffman.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
I think, coming in, she had the most wins under her belt from other precursors. She had won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Drama. I think it was a distant second. I don't think there was ever really a chance of her winning, but she definitely had the strongest, or at least the second strongest track record coming into Oscar night over the rest of the crowd.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'm almost 100% sure that it was Felicity Huffman as the runner-up. I truly think that none of the other three had enough momentum or narrative or passion to get that runner-up status. I think Felicity had a lot of goodwill coming off of Desperate Housewives. All that love was very much in the air still by 2006. And she was just, such a obvious sort of transformative performance in an era where that kind of thing was rewarded a lot, like over and over, since I wouldn't say Julia Roberts was transformative necessarily, but a similar kind of like slightly de-glam type of thing. That, yeah, she was the dramatic alternative.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely a more Oscar-friendly kind of role. You as you said, it's got that kind of transformative de-glam look to it. I think you've said it all. There was a dark horse quality to it. I don't think she was ever going to win, but yeah, she was pretty much indisputably second place.
Yeah. Well, now I will ask you, I think you've already said it, but who would you have voted for from this lineup?
Keira Knightley, hands down.
Yeah, I agree. I would have voted for Keira Knightley as well from a pretty uninspired lineup. I think she is kind of my default choice ultimately,
Right.
but in a way that I still think it's an incredible performance that is so much more difficult than it seems.
It totally is. I don't think it's like an iconic performance. I think we've seen some iconic winners leading up to this. You've got Nicole Kidman and Charlize Theron, and there will be Marion Cotillard coming up. I mean, you've got some really strong stuff. I'm not sure that Keira Knightley rises to that level, but especially amongst this lineup, I think it's such a strong performance, and I think she's just luminous in it. And she would absolutely have been my pick here.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, who would be your number 2 from this lineup? Because, Keira Knightley is both of our default picks. Just curious if you would have an alternative.
Maybe Charlize Theron. That feels very default to me as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Reese is strong. I think I probably would have done Reese third. And then Judi Dench and then Felicity Huffman.
Yeah. I think it shocks me to say it because I didn't expect to feel this way going into this week, but Reese Witherspoon would probably be my second place here. I think she does the most with the least, I would say. Anyway, Mattie, this was so much fun having you on for the first time. This was such a great discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.
Rough year. I think we still had fun.
That's what makes it fun sometimes.
Yeah. Well, tell people where they could find more of you on the internet.
You can find me on my brand new website, transcendentalcinema.com. You can also follow along with me on Twitter at Cinematti.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on all platforms at Kevin_Jacobson. The show's at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram, and The Runner Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is, where you can hear a lot of bonus episodes. Next week, we'll be breaking down the Best Actress lineup of 2006, where the nominees were Penelope Cruz in Voltaire, Judi Dench in Notes on a Scandal, Helen Mirren in The Queen, Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada, and Kate Winslet in Little Children, with the winner being Helen Mirren. Should be a good show. So with that, thanks again, Mattie.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.